My family demanded I move out of my own house so my stepsister could have it. I said no, and the karma that followed was absolute perfection. My stepsister spent 22 years making sure everyone knew I wasn't her real brother, but the moment she went bankrupt, she showed up at my house with a moving truck and our entire extended family to force her way in. I didn't just lock the deadbolt in their faces, I exposed her manipulation in the middle of my driveway, turning her own army against her and setting off a chain reaction of karma I couldn't have planned better if I tried. The absolute audacity of the situation didn't fully hit me until I was staring across my own dining room table, watching my mother and my stepfather casually ask me to pack my bags and vacate the home I owned. I am 29 years old. If you had asked me a year ago who in my family despised me the most, the answer would have been instantaneous. My stepsister, Chloe. She is 32 now, and for over 2 decades, she made it her absolute life's mission to ensure I knew my place as an unwanted outsider. The sickening irony? She only remembered we were family when she decided she was entitled to my property. My biological father passed away when I was just 4 years old. I barely have any memories of him, just fragmented images of a man pushing me on a swing set. When I was 7, my mother married Arthur. Arthur was a quiet, non-confrontational man who came with a daughter from a previous marriage, Chloe, who was 3 years older than me. As a lonely kid, I was ecstatic. I had always begged my mother for an older sibling. I thought I was finally getting the big, happy family I'd always dreamed of. I thought my life was about to become whole. Instead, it turned into a psychological war zone. On the day our parents got married, there was a small reception in our backyard. I remember walking over to Chloe in my itchy little suit, holding a small gift box. Inside was a cheap friendship bracelet I had bought using chore money I'd been saving for weeks. It had both of our initials engraved on a tiny, fake silver charm. To a 7-year-old, it was a massive gesture. I held it out to her, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. She looked at the bracelet for exactly 2 seconds, slapped my hand away, and sneered, "I'm not your sister. Don't ever call me that." I just stood there, frozen, while a few nearby adults chuckled awkwardly, assuming she was just being a shy, moody 10-year-old adjusting to a blended family. But she wasn't being shy. She meant every single syllable. From that day forward, Chloe made it her personal, unrelenting mission to remind me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of our home. If anyone at school accidentally referred to us as brother and sister, she would immediately stop whatever she was doing to correct them, loudly and aggressively. If relatives introduced us together at Thanksgiving, she would interrupt and explain that we shared 0 blood and weren't actually related. Whenever her friends came over to the house, she would point at me and say, "That's just my dad's wife's kid. Ignore him." She never once introduced me as her brother. Not a single time in 22 years. At first, I kept trying. Kids are stupidly optimistic. I would ask if she wanted to play video games, she would roll her eyes and slam her bedroom door in my face. I would ask if she wanted to ride bikes, she would wait until I went inside to get my helmet, then pedal away with her friends without me. I even tried including her whenever my few friends came over, figuring maybe if we just spent more time together, her icy exterior would melt. Instead, she weaponized those moments. She would tell my friends deeply embarrassing, completely fabricated stories just to make them laugh at my expense. She once convinced my entire 6th grade class that I still slept with a nightlight because I was terrified of the dark. Another time, she told the neighborhood kids that I wet the bed until I was 11. Completely made up, but she loved crafting these lies because she knew people rarely bothered to verify the truth. Arthur corrected her occasionally, but never in a way that actually mattered or carried consequences. He would sigh heavily, rub his temples, and say, "Chloe, please be nice to your brother." She would instantly snap back, "He is not my brother." Arthur would just throw his hands up, tell her to stop arguing, and walk away. That was the extent of his parenting. There were never any groundings. There were never any revoked privileges. My mother constantly made excuses, telling me that Chloe was still grieving her parents' divorce and just needed patience. Apparently, that required patience had a timeline of over 2 decades. Things deteriorated even further after my younger half-sister, Lily, was born. Chloe absolutely adored Lily because they shared the same biological father. She would constantly tell Lily, right in front of me, that she had one real sister and one fake brother. Lily was way too young to understand the malicious intent, but hearing those words repeated daily eventually confused her enough that she started asking our parents why Chloe hated me so much. Even then, nobody truly addressed the toxic environment. Everyone in that house just wanted peace, and I learned very quickly that keeping Chloe happy was vastly more important to them than holding her accountable for her cruelty. So, to protect my own sanity, I completely stopped trying. By the time I reached high school, we existed as ghosts to one another. We barely spoke unless absolutely necessary. She spent her weekends going to massive parties, shopping for expensive clothes, and acting like royalty. I spent my weekends working grueling shifts at a local hardware store, hauling bags of mulch and mixing paint. I saved every single paycheck because I wanted out of that house the second I turned 18. Chloe would actively laugh at me whenever she saw me coming home covered in dirt, exhausted from working overtime. She used to taunt me, saying I was throwing away my youth while she was actually living life to the fullest. Maybe she was right in the short term. I didn't have the carefree, exciting teenage years she did. I didn't travel to Cancun for spring break. I didn't wear designer labels. I didn't have my parents finance a brand new car for me. I worked, I studied, and I hoarded my money like my life depended on it. After graduation, my hard work paid off. I earned a substantial scholarship to study mechanical engineering at a solid state university. I continued working night shifts as a security guard to pay for my living expenses, graduated with practically zero student debt, and immediately landed a fantastic job designing manufacturing equipment for a major firm. I slowly, meticulously built a career. I wasn't a millionaire by any stretch, but I was incredibly financially stable before I even hit my late 20s. More importantly, I stayed entirely out of debt. Every raise I got went straight into high-yield savings. Every annual bonus went into an investment portfolio specifically earmarked for a down payment. 4 years ago, I finally bought my first house. It wasn't a massive mansion. It was a modest, older home in a quiet, established neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 1 small office, a decent-sized backyard with mature oak trees, and a detached garage that desperately needed a new roof. It was definitely a fixer-upper, but it had incredible bones and endless potential. I spent almost every single weekend for 2 years renovating that house with my own 2 hands. I ripped out the hideous 1970s carpet and laid down beautiful hardwood flooring. I completely gutted and remodeled the kitchen, installing new cabinets and quartz countertops myself. I repainted every single room, landscaped the overgrown yard, and even rebuilt the rotting back deck with the help of a guy from work. By the time I was finally finished, it looked absolutely nothing like the dilapidated property I had originally purchased. It looked like a home. I was fiercely proud of every single square inch of that property because I had bled, sweat, and sacrificed to earn it. Meanwhile, Chloe's life had gone in the exact opposite direction. She married a guy named Marcus, who made a very comfortable living running a mid-sized commercial roofing company. Together, they easily earned enough to live a great life, but comfortable was never enough for Chloe. They constantly needed to project immense wealth. They leased 2 luxury SUVs they swapped out every year, financed absurdly expensive modern furniture, took lavish vacations to Europe every summer, and relentlessly posted highly curated pictures online to ensure everyone knew they were living their best life. Every Christmas, she would proudly parade around with a new designer handbag that cost more than my mortgage payment. Every birthday party she threw for her 3 kids looked like a catered corporate event. Whenever relatives complimented my house at family gatherings, Chloe would roll her eyes, shrug indifferently, and say it was cute for a bachelor who lives completely alone. The one and only time she actually visited my house after I finished the massive renovations, she walked through every single room with a scowl, refusing to say a single positive word. Right before she walked out the front door, she looked around the open concept living area and muttered, "Seems like a massive waste for just one person to hoard all this space." At the time, I brushed it off as just another classic, bitter Chloe comment. Looking back now, I realize that was the exact moment she started viewing my home not as my accomplishment but as a resource she inherently deserved more than I did. We rarely spoke after that day. Holidays were the only time we occupied the same physical space, and even then, she would barely acknowledge my existence unless she needed something heavy lifted, a toy fixed, or a piece of furniture assembled. It was darkly hilarious to me how I wasn't family for 364 days of the year, but the moment manual labor was required, I was suddenly expected to step up. Then, last winter, her entire house of cards collapsed. Marcus's roofing business started hemorrhaging money after 2 massive commercial contracts fell through due to supply chain issues and poor management. Instead of doing the logical thing, downsizing, cutting personal expenses, and weathering the storm, they doubled down on their delusion. They refinanced their vehicles, maxed out multiple high-limit credit cards, and somehow convinced themselves that if they just projected success, another huge contract would magically appear to save them. It didn't. Within 8 months, the business imploded completely. The bankruptcy was messy and public. Creditors came aggressively after the company equipment. Their luxury vehicles were repossessed in the middle of the night, and they fell over 6 months behind on the rent for their massive McMansion. The pressure broke them. One rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus packed a single large suitcase, told Chloe he absolutely could not handle the stress or her constant screaming anymore, and walked out the door. He completely abandoned them. Nobody heard from him for weeks. Suddenly, Chloe found herself completely unemployed, drowning in insurmountable debt, with 3 young children and absolutely nowhere to go. After the landlord officially finalized the eviction process, she had no choice but to move back into Arthur and my mother's house. Unfortunately for her, that house only had 4 bedrooms. One obviously belonged to my parents. One belonged to Lily, who was currently living at home while commuting to a local nursing program. The third had been permanently converted into Arthur's hobby room and office after his retirement. That left Chloe and her 3 highly energetic, undisciplined children squeezed into a single, standard-sized guest bedroom. According to the exhausted phone calls I received from my mother, everyone in that house was absolutely miserable within the first 2 weeks. The children fought constantly because they had zero personal space. Chloe complained relentlessly about everything: the quality of the groceries my parents bought, the speed of the Wi-Fi, the temperature of the house. She expected my mother to provide free, full-time babysitting while she supposedly looked for a job. Yet, months dragged by without her securing a single interview. Arthur was quietly draining his retirement savings to cover her personal expenses because she claimed she couldn't handle the stress of being broke. Every conversation I had with my mother inevitably devolved into a long, weeping complaint about how exhausted and financially drained she was. I sympathized with her, truly, but I maintained a strict boundary. I stayed entirely out of it. It wasn't my circus, and it certainly wasn't my monkeys. Then came the Saturday afternoon that permanently shattered my relationship with my family. My mother called me early in the morning, her voice trembling slightly, asking if she and Arthur could stop by my house because they desperately needed to discuss something incredibly important. Given her tone, I honestly thought someone had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. I told them to come right over. When they arrived, they sat at my dining room table looking unusually pale and nervous. My mother kept wringing her hands and absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. Arthur cleared his throat loudly, shifted in his chair, and finally broke the suffocating silence. "Liam, we've been doing a lot of thinking about Chloe's living situation," he began, his voice tight. I nodded slowly, keeping my face completely neutral. I stayed quiet, waiting for the punchline. He continued, "Your house, it has plenty of room, 3 bedrooms, a big yard. It's safe." The second those words left his mouth, a heavy, icy pit formed in my stomach. I instantly knew exactly where this insane conversation was heading, and I knew with absolute certainty that the next few minutes were going to irrevocably change my life. Arthur leaned forward, folding his hands together on my table as if he were about to negotiate a corporate merger rather than asking his stepson for a life-altering, monumental favor. "Your mother and I were thinking that maybe Chloe and the kids could stay here with you for a little while," he said, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. "Just until she gets back on her feet and figures things out." I stared at him. Then I looked at my mother, who was now intensely studying the wood grain of the table. "How long exactly is a little while?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Arthur shrugged, looking away. "A few months, maybe? Just through the end of the year." That vague, non-committal answer alone told me everything I needed to know. Nobody had actually thought this through. A few months, in family favor time, easily translates to a year, which then translates to permanent residency. "Has she actually found a job yet?" I asked. My mother quietly admitted she hadn't. "Is she actively interviewing anywhere?" I pressed. Another long, agonizingly uncomfortable silence filled the dining room. Arthur finally mumbled that she had been focusing entirely on getting the children emotionally settled first. That sounded incredibly suspicious, considering she had already been living at their house for nearly 4 months. Then, my mother finally looked up. Her eyes were red. She took a deep breath and dropped the real bomb. "Liam, she actually had another idea," my mother whispered nervously. "We know you like your privacy, so we think maybe it would be easier if you just came and stayed with us for a while instead." I blinked. I genuinely thought I had suffered a minor stroke and misheard her. "Stayed with you? What do you mean?" My mother nodded carefully, as if she were approaching a wild animal. "Just temporarily, honey. You could take the guest room. That way the children wouldn't have to be cramped, and your house already has enough bedrooms for all of them. It makes the most logical sense." I actually laughed out loud. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a harsh, barking laugh born of pure, unadulterated disbelief. It was so profoundly absurd that my brain literally short-circuited trying to process the sheer audacity of the request. "So, let me make sure I am understanding this perfectly," I said, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. "Chloe doesn't just want to stay with me. She wants me to physically pack my belongings, move out of my own home, the home I bought, the home I pay the mortgage on, the home I spent 2 years rebuilding, so she can move into it." Arthur immediately held his hands up defensively. "Now, Liam, don't frame it like that. It's not like that at all." "Then explain to me exactly how it's different, Arthur," I challenged, staring a hole right through him. He opened his mouth, desperately searched for a rational explanation, failed completely, and closed it again. My mother tried to step in, her voice pleading, "Honey, you are one person, you don't need all this space. She is raising 3 growing children, they are sleeping on air mattresses. It breaks my heart." Another heavy silence fell over the room. I leaned back in my chair and slowly looked around the dining room. I looked at the custom trim I had installed myself. I looked at the light fixtures I had wired. I remembered spending entire weekends covered head to toe in itchy fiberglass insulation and drywall dust because I couldn't afford to hire professional contractors. I had built this sanctuary. And now, they were sitting in it, asking me to surrender it because my childhood tormentor had ruined her own life and decided she deserved the fruits of my labor. Did Chloe actually ask for this directly? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Arthur sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It was her suggestion, yes. Of course it was. My mother reached across the table and gently touched my hand. Liam, please, she is under a tremendous amount of stress. She's desperate. I firmly, but gently, pulled my hand away from hers. Mom. She spent 22 years telling me, and everyone else who would listen, that I was not family. She made my childhood a living hell. That was a long time ago, Arthur interjected quickly. She was just a kid. Really? I shot back. Because last Christmas, less than 10 months ago, her youngest son asked who I was. Do you remember how she introduced me, Arthur? She told a 5-year-old that I was Grandpa Arthur's wife's son. She couldn't even bring herself to use the word stepbrother. Neither of them said a word. They both knew it was true. Has she apologized for any of it? I asked, my voice rising just a fraction. Has she ever admitted she treated me like garbage? Has she even picked up the phone to call me herself to ask for this massive future favor? My mother looked down at her lap and quietly whispered, no. So, I summarized, she doesn't think she owes me an ounce of respect or an apology, but she genuinely believes I owe her my entire house. Arthur's face flushed red, and he became visibly irritated. Nobody is asking you to give away your house, Liam, it's temporary. If I move out, and she moves in with 3 kids, without paying rent, without signing a legally binding lease, and without a hard move-out date, what exactly am I doing, Arthur? I'm giving her my house. I shook my head in disgust. I've read enough horror stories to know exactly how this ends. 3 months becomes 6, 6 months becomes a year. And when I finally demand my house back, I'm the villain who is forcing innocent children out onto the street. You would never support me kicking them out. I looked at both of them and delivered my final verdict. No. Not maybe. Not let me think about it. The answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no. My mother instantly burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of profound disappointment and deep offense. I really thought we raised you to help family, he said bitterly. That single sentence ignited a fury inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Family? I practically spat the word. That is an incredibly interesting word coming from you, Arthur. Where was all this passionate family talk when Chloe spent 2 decades telling everyone I wasn't her brother? Where were you when she bullied me in my own home? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She was a kid. People change. Has she? I demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, the only thing that has changed is that she ran out of money and needs something I have. My mother, sobbing softly, begged me to at least consider letting Chloe and the kids move in while I remained in the house. You could just share the space, she pleaded. Absolutely not, I refused instantly. Why are you being so cold? She cried. Because she would never leave, Mom. She already believes she is inherently entitled to my house. You don't think she would immediately start taking over? Then what happens when I want her out? You'll beg me to wait just a little longer because moving the kids again would be traumatic. I refused to set myself on fire to keep her warm. Neither of them answered. They couldn't, because they both knew my prediction was 100% accurate. The dynamic of my entire childhood had always been that the reasonable person me had to compromise to appease the unreasonable person, Chloe. I was refusing to play the game anymore. Arthur finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I am deeply disappointed in you, Liam. I'm disappointed we even had to ask. I'm disappointed you had the nerve to ask, I replied coldly. They left shortly afterward. My mother hugged me at the door, but it felt incredibly tense, like she knew a massive line had been crossed. Arthur simply marched to his truck without looking back. I locked the door behind them, let out a massive breath, and honestly believed that would be the end of it. I had set my boundary. They had heard me. It was over. I was incredibly naive. 3 days later, all hell broke loose. I was sitting in a mid-morning project management meeting at work when my phone started vibrating furiously in my pocket. It didn't stop. Buzz after buzz after buzz. Since I was presenting, I ignored it until I got back to my desk at lunch. When I finally unlocked my screen, my jaw dropped. I had 22 missed calls and over 50 unread text messages. Most of them were from extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, some in years. The very first text I opened was from my Aunt Brenda. It simply read, "How could you be so utterly heartless?" Another text from a cousin said, "Those poor kids deserve better than a selfish monster for an uncle." Completely bewildered and feeling a rising sense of panic, I opened Facebook for the first time in weeks. Right at the very top of my feed was a massive, multi-paragraph public post from Chloe. She hadn't explicitly used my name, but she painted a picture so clear it didn't matter. She wrote a tragic, tear-jerking saga about being horribly abandoned by her husband, struggling to keep her 3 beautiful children fed, and having a wealthy, single relative with a massive, empty house who cruelly refused to help because he cared more about his pristine hardwood floors than his own flesh and blood. She actually wrote, and I quote, "My babies are sleeping on the floor, crying because someone who claims to love this family slammed the door in our faces when we begged for shelter." That specific lie made my blood boil, considering she had never once stepped foot on my porch to ask me anything. She finished the post by stating she prayed her children would never grow up to be as cold, bitter, and materialistic as some people. The post had absolutely blown up. There were hundreds of reactions and dozens of comments from family members, mutual friends, and complete strangers calling me a sociopath, a narcissist, and a monster. The worst part wasn't the strangers, it was my own relatives agreeing with her. People who had sat at Thanksgiving tables and watched her relentlessly bully and reject me for 20 years were suddenly acting like I was legally and morally obligated to rescue her from her own financial ruin. I didn't reply to the post. I didn't defend myself in the comments. Instead, I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every single paragraph and every single nasty comment from my relatives. My gut told me this escalation was far from over. About an hour later, my phone rang again. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. Against my better judgment, I stepped into an empty conference room and answered it. She didn't even say hello. "You embarrassed mom," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. I actually laughed. "I embarrassed mom? You're the one airing dirty laundry on Facebook." "She cried for 2 days because you flat out refused to help us when we are drowning," Chloe accused. "No," I replied smoothly. "She cried because she finally realized how completely insane and ridiculous your demand was, and she knew I wasn't going to roll over for you." Chloe's tone instantly shifted from victim to dictator. "You are seriously going to make my children suffer over some pathetic childhood grudge? Grow up, Liam." "This has absolutely nothing to do with childhood," I said. "This is about the fact that you are demanding I move out of the house that I own and pay for." She sighed dramatically, playing the role of the exhausted, reasonable mother dealing with a petulant child. "You don't even need all that space, it's selfish. You're hoarding a house you barely use. That is not your decision to make," I answered, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Maybe I am selfish. But selfish people usually don't spend 22 years telling someone they aren't family, only to turn around and demand the keys to their property." She went dead quiet for a few seconds. When she finally spoke, she said something that genuinely sent a chill down my spine. "Dad agrees with me. And so does everyone else." That single, arrogant sentence told me everything I needed to know about her mindset. She genuinely believed she was going to win. She had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted because Arthur would rather surrender than deal with her tantrums. She thought she could just bully me into submission using the rest of the family as a weapon. "Arthur's disappointment doesn't pay my mortgage," I said coldly. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. I figured she would spend a few more days playing the victim online before eventually accepting reality and finding a cheap apartment. I couldn't have been more wrong. Chloe didn't do reality. The following Saturday morning, I was in my front yard, sweating through a t-shirt as I mowed the lawn. The neighborhood was quiet. Then, I noticed a large silver SUV slowly pull onto my street and park directly in my driveway. A few seconds later, a second car pulled up behind it. Then, a massive Ford pickup truck towing a large, enclosed utility trailer parked against the curb. My stomach immediately dropped into my shoes. I recognized the silver SUV, it was Arthur's. Before I could even reach down to shut off the lawnmower, the doors of the vehicle swung open, and people started climbing out. They weren't just visiting. They were carrying large, heavy cardboard moving boxes and plastic storage bins. For a brief, surreal second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I genuinely thought maybe they were dropping off donations for a charity drive somewhere in the neighborhood. Then, Chloe stepped out of the passenger side of the truck. She looked right at me, smiled like we were the best of friends, and shouted over the roar of the mower, "Perfect timing, we brought the first load." I killed the engine. The sudden silence in the yard was deafening. I walked toward the driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, looking at the small army of relatives gathering on my driveway. "Moving in," Chloe answered casually, adjusting her sunglasses as if she were simply stating the weather. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. 2 of my older cousins, guys I used to play baseball with, had already dropped the tailgate of the trailer and were hauling out a massive dresser. My Aunt Brenda, the same aunt who called me a monster on Facebook, was marching up my walkway carrying 3 overflowing grocery bags. Arthur was standing near his truck, looking incredibly uncomfortable, actively staring at his shoes to avoid looking at me. My mother wasn't there. That was the very first detail that clicked in my brain. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I asked Chloe, my voice rising in disbelief. "I told you no." She rolled her eyes exaggeratedly. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Liam. Everyone talked about it. and we all agreed this is the best, most practical solution for the kids. Who is everyone? I snapped. The people in this family, who actually care about each other. She shot back smugly. One of my cousins carrying the dresser paused, looking slightly confused. He offered an awkward, apologetic smile. Hey man, we figured once you talked things over with Arthur and cooled down, you'd be cool with it. We're just here to help with the heavy lifting. I looked dead at him. Did Arthur tell you I agreed to this? The cousin hesitated, glancing nervously at Arthur. Well, no. But Chloe said. Did anyone actually bother to ask me? I yelled, my voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. Nobody answered. Aunt Brenda froze on the walkway. Chloe stepped closer to me, lowering her voice and speaking in that condescending, sickeningly sweet tone you use to scold a toddler. Look, Liam, everyone knows you're incredibly stubborn. We figured once the kids were actually here, and the furniture was inside, you'd stop throwing this little tantrum and accept it. It's happening. Just open the door. I couldn't believe the sheer, psychopathic manipulation I was witnessing. She hadn't come to beg. She hadn't come to negotiate. She had decided to skip my consent entirely and rely entirely on overwhelming social pressure. She genuinely believed that if she showed up with half the extended family carrying her belongings, I would be too socially paralyzed and embarrassed to cause a scene and send them away. She thought I would just step aside and let her conquer my home. Unfortunately for her, she had severely miscalculated who I had become. I didn't say another word to her. I turned my back, walked straight past Aunt Brenda, marched up the steps to my front porch, unlocked my heavy front door, stepped inside, and slammed it shut. I immediately threw the deadbolt and locked the chain. Through the large front window, I watched the absolute chaos unfold. People were standing frozen in the driveway, holding boxes, looking incredibly confused. Chloe's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of pure rage. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Arthur. I answered it and put it on speaker. Open the door, Liam. Arthur said, his voice trembling with stress. Get off my property, Arthur, I replied coldly. All of you. Right now. Or I am calling the police and having every single one of you trespassed. I could hear Chloe screaming in the background. He's bluffing. He wouldn't dare call the cops on family. Try me, I said directly into the phone. Stop making a scene in my neighborhood. You are trying to break into a home you do not own. Arthur sighed, a ragged, defeated sound. Liam, please, the kids are standing out here in the heat. Just come outside and let's talk about this like adults. If the kids are hot, take them back to your house, I said. I am not opening this door until the trailer is packed and you are leaving. I hung up. 5 minutes of agonizing silence passed. I stood out of sight, watching through the blinds. Relatives were arguing in hushed tones. My cousins had set the dresser down on the concrete. Finally, there was a series of loud, heavy knocks on my front door. It was Arthur. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door exactly 3 inches, leaving the heavy brass security chain firmly in place. I glared out at him. Chloe was standing right behind his shoulder, practically vibrating with anger. The rest of the family had gathered on the lawn, watching the spectacle. Son, Arthur started, his eyes pleading. Do not call me son, I interrupted sharply, my voice loud enough for the entire yard to hear. Do not ever call me son when you are standing on my porch, trying to help a woman forcefully occupy my house after I explicitly told you no. Arthur's face crumpled. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. He admitted, his voice cracking, that this entire ambush had been Chloe's master plan. He confessed that he only came along because Chloe convinced him that if he was there, I would listen to reason and back down to avoid humiliating the family. I looked at him with absolute disgust. I have one question for you, Arthur. If I showed up at your house right now, with a U-Haul full of my furniture, and demanded to move into your bedroom after you told me no, what would you do? He didn't answer. He just stared at the porch boards. Chloe pushed past him, grabbing the edge of the door. That is completely different and you know it. She shrieked. How? How? I demanded. Because you don't have children. She screamed, her face red. There it was. The ultimate trump card she had relied on her entire adult life. The delusion that giving birth automatically entitled her to the assets, property, and labor of everyone around her. I let go of the door, stepped back, and raised my voice so every single relative in the driveway could hear me clearly. Did any of you actually ask her if she was planning to pay rent? I yelled to the crowd. Silence. My cousins looked at each other nervously. Did any of you ask if she was going to pay the water bill, the electric bill, the property taxes? I continued. More dead silence. Aunt Brenda slowly lowered the grocery bag she was holding onto the grass. Did anyone ask her how long she was planning to stay in my house? I asked. Aunt Brenda cleared her throat awkwardly. She told us it would just be for 2 or 3 months, until she gets her new job sorted out. New. I turned my eyes back to Chloe, who was suddenly looking very panicked. How long, Chloe? I demanded. She crossed her arms defensively. Until I am financially stable again, which means however long it takes. 6 months? I pushed. She shrugged aggressively. A year? 2 years? She refused to answer, she just glared at me. She didn't have to say it out loud. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, the collective realization washed over the entire driveway. Everyone finally understood exactly what I had known from the very beginning. There was no timeline. There was no plan. There was only a parasite looking for a host. She intended to move in, establish residency, and force me to legally evict my own nieces and nephews when I finally had enough. I looked directly at my 2 cousins. You guys took a Saturday off to haul furniture because she told you I agreed to this. I didn't. I told Arthur and my mother no 3 separate times. Chloe knew I said no. She lied to all of you to use you as muscle to intimidate me. Both of my cousins immediately walked over to the dresser, picked it up, and loaded it straight back into the trailer. One of them looked at me, shook his head, and muttered, "I am so sorry, Liam, we had no idea." Aunt Brenda looked horrified. She turned to Chloe. "Chloe, is that true? Did he actually say no?" Asked her back. "This city," and a commas. Chloe panicked. She instantly went on the defensive, her voice hitting a shrill, hysterical pitch. "He's twisting everything. He's a liar. Mom said he was considering it. I just wanted to expedite the process." I didn't argue. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened my text messages, and pulled up a conversation I had with my mother 2 days prior. I unhooked the door chain, stepped onto the porch, and handed the phone directly to Aunt Brenda. The messages were damning. They clearly showed my mother begging me one last time to reconsider, and my response was crystal clear. "Mom, for the final time, the answer is absolutely not. Chloe is not moving into my house under any circumstances. Do not ask me again." There was no misunderstanding. There were no mixed signals. Aunt Brenda read the glowing screen in silence. Her face turned bright red. She looked up at Chloe with a mixture of shock and utter disgust. Without saying a single word, Brenda handed my phone back, turned around, picked up her grocery bags, and marched straight back to her car. One by one, the relatives started putting boxes back into the vehicles. Nobody argued with me anymore. Nobody told me to reconsider or think of the children. They had all realized they had been masterfully manipulated into participating in a home invasion. Chloe completely lost her mind. She realized she was losing her army, and she snapped. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, flailing her arms. She accused my cousins of being spineless cowards. She accused Aunt Brenda of abandoning family. She screamed that I was a sociopath who had orchestrated this entire public humiliation just to get revenge on her. Finally, she turned her wrath on Arthur, violently shoving his shoulder and screaming that he was a pathetic excuse for a father because he wasn't forcing me to open the door. That is when the impossible happened. Arthur, the man who had spent 22 years avoiding conflict at all costs, the man who had let this monster terrorize my childhood just to keep the peace, finally broke. "Enough!" Arthur roared. The sound was so loud, so completely out of character, that the entire street went dead silent. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Arthur's face was purple with rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Chloe's face. "He told us no. He told us no days ago, and I told you we needed to respect that. You lied to me. You lied to the family. You dragged us all out here to ambush him, and I was stupid enough to let you bully me into it. This is over. Get in the truck." Chloe stared at him, her mouth hanging open in complete, unadulterated shock. You're taking his side?" she whispered, genuinely unable to comprehend the concept of being told no by her father. Arthur closed his eyes for a long second, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm taking the side that is actually right, Chloe. For once in my life." It had taken 3 decades, a bankruptcy, and a driveway full of humiliated relatives, but Arthur had finally stopped asking the reasonable person to surrender to the tyrant. Chloe looked around the yard, desperately waiting for someone, anyone, to jump to her defense. Nobody did. My cousin slammed the trailer doors shut and locked the latch. Aunt Brenda started her car engine. The children, who had been sitting in the back seat of the SUV watching iPads, were completely silent, sensing the massive shift in gravity. Arthur looked entirely defeated. His shoulders slumped, and he looked incredibly old. Instead of accepting defeat gracefully, Chloe doubled down on the venom. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You planned this," she hissed. "You've been waiting your whole pathetic life for a chance to ruin me because you're still crying that I never accepted you as a brother." I smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. "You're actually right about one thing, Chloe," I said smoothly. "You never accepted me as your brother. You spent 22 years correcting teachers, relatives, and your own friends. You made damn sure everyone knew we weren't family." I took a step closer to the edge of the porch. "But the absolute second you needed a free house, suddenly I'm your beloved brother? Suddenly we're blood?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Which is it, Chloe?" I demanded, my voice echoing. "Am I your brother, or am I just your dad's wife's kid?" She looked away, staring at the concrete. That's exactly what I thought, I said. I turned around, walked back inside, and locked the door for good. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was completely empty. Update 2. It has been about 6 months since the driveway incident, and the fallout has been nothing short of spectacular. Later that evening, my mother finally came over. She had been at a church event when Chloe orchestrated the ambush and had no idea it was happening until Arthur came home and told her everything. She sat on my couch and cried, apologizing profusely for ever putting the idea in Chloe's head that my house was an option. She admitted that she had been terrified of Chloe's temper and was just trying to find an easy way out of the nightmare of living with her. I forgave my mom, but I made it incredibly clear that I was setting ironclad boundaries moving forward. I changed my locks the next day and installed a full ring security camera system around the perimeter of my property. Arthur and I had a very long, very painful lunch a few weeks later. He looked me in the eye and gave me the apology I had waited my entire life to hear. He admitted he had failed me as a parent. He said he spent his whole life giving in to Chloe because arguing with her was exhausting, but watching her try to steal my home and manipulate the entire family finally shattered his illusion. He realized he had created a monster. We are slowly rebuilding our relationship. It's not perfect, but for the first time, it's built on actual honesty and respect. As for Chloe, the karma she received was absolute poetry. Remember Aunt Brenda? The one who called me a monster on Facebook and brought grocery bags to the ambush. Well, after the driveway incident, Brenda decided to play the ultimate family martyr. She publicly announced that she was taking Chloe and the 3 kids into her cramped, 2-bedroom condo because real family never turns their back. It took exactly 3 months for Brenda to deeply regret that decision. Chloe, true to form, refused to get a job. She took over Brenda's master bedroom, forcing Brenda to sleep on a lumpy sofa in her own living room. Chloe ran up the electric bill, ate all the food, and treated Brenda like a live-in maid. When Brenda finally snapped and demanded Chloe start paying rent or leave, Chloe threatened to call Child Protective Services and report Brenda's condo as an unsafe living environment to tie her up in legal trouble. Last month, Aunt Brenda called me, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me for a $3,000 loan to hire a lawyer to legally evict Chloe from the condo. I listened quietly to her cry for about 5 minutes. Then, I cleared my throat and said, "Aunt Brenda, I'm really surprised by this. I mean, those poor children deserve better. I really expected more compassion from you." I quoted her exact Facebook comment back to her word for word. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then I hung up and blocked her number. Eventually, Arthur forced Chloe to get a job working reception at a dental office. Between her meager income and the child support she finally managed to squeeze out of Marcus, who was found working under the table in another state, she was forced to rent a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. It is a far cry from the luxury SUVs and designer bags she used to flaunt. I haven't spoken a single word to Chloe since the day I locked the door in her face. My life is peaceful, my house is quiet, and I sleep perfectly every single night knowing I finally stood up for myself. I didn't refuse to help her because I hate children. I refused because I will never set myself on fire to keep someone warm who spent 20 years trying to freeze me out. My parents sabotaged my medical school scholarship to protect my sister's ego. So I exposed their fraud to my billionaire grandpa, and he annihilated Dad's empire. My parents secretly submitted fraudulent financial documents to destroy my medical school scholarship so I'd be forced to attend my twin sister's mediocre college. So, I exposed their fraud to my ruthless grandfather, and he publicly annihilated my father's empire before I delivered the final, humiliating blow on a stage in front of hundreds. I'm Julian. I was 18 years old when my parents systematically tried to destroy my future because my twin sister, Chloe, wasn't as academically gifted as I was. Before I tell you about the incredible moment of public humiliation that finally shattered their control and set me free, let me give you the background. It all detonated on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April. The air in our house was thick with a suffocating, nervous energy. It was mail day, not just bills and junk mail, but the heavy, stiff envelopes from universities across the country, the envelopes that held the coded messages of our futures. Chloe and I were both vying for spots in competitive pre-med programs. It was the path our parents had laid out for us since birth. She was perched on the very edge of our expensive, uncomfortable living room sofa, her knee bouncing a frantic rhythm against the velvet cushion. My mother, Beatrice, was fluttering around the room, pretending to dust already spotless bookshelves, her eyes darting toward Chloe every few seconds. My father, Arthur, was hidden behind the wall of his financial newspaper, a fortress of silence. But I noticed he hadn't turned a single page in over 15 minutes. When the familiar squeak of the mail truck echoed down our obsessively manicured suburban street, Chloe shot up as if she'd been electrocuted. She got to the mailbox first. It was an unspoken rule in our house, Chloe always went first. She returned, shuffling through the stack, her lips moving silently as she sorted. "Okay, 2 for me," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. She ripped one open with practiced flair. A slow smile spread across her face. Oak Ridge College. I'm in. A collective sigh of relief swept through my parents. Oh, Chloe, sweetheart, that's just phenomenal. My mother cooed, rushing over to envelop her in a suffocating hug. My father actually lowered his newspaper to give a tight, approving nod. One down. The family honor was secure. Chloe opened her second letter. Wait. Rejected from Vanguard. Her tone was flat, devastated. Vanguard Institute of Medicine, V.I.M., was the absolute pinnacle. Oak Ridge was a fine school, but it wasn't a bragging right at their country club. She then looked at me, her expression shifting to something dark and defensive. She held out a single, pristine white envelope. Embossed in the corner was the official gold seal of the Vanguard Institute of Medicine. My absolute dream. My long shot. I took it from her outstretched hand. My own palms were slick with cold sweat. I retreated to the armchair in the far corner of the room, needing a pocket of space in the suffocating atmosphere. My fingers trembled as I slid them under the flap. I pulled out the single, heavy sheet of paper. The first word I saw in bold, elegant type was, "Congratulations." A huge, goofy grin split my face. I couldn't stop it. It felt like the sun had just burst through the clouds inside my chest. I got in, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I cleared it, trying again louder. I got in. I got into Vanguard. I looked up, my face beaming, expecting a shared explosion of joy. A we did it moment. This was a huge win for the family name, right? Wrong? So incredibly wrong. The room had gone utterly, unnervingly silent. My father's newspaper was back up, a shield of total indifference. My mother's celebratory smile had evaporated, replaced by a mask of strained concern directed solely at Chloe, whose face had crumpled as she stared at her own thin rejection letter from the exact same institution. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice a travesty of forced brightness. Oh, well, she said, her eyes flitting toward me for a millisecond before locking back onto Chloe. At least one of you got some good news today. It wasn't a congratulations, it was a damage report. My life-altering achievement was framed as nothing more than a consolation prize for my sister's disappointment. My success was an inconvenience they now had to manage. That night, after a dinner eaten in near total silence, I tried to talk to Chloe. I knocked on her door. "Chloe, you okay? Just leave me alone, Julian." Her voice came back, muffled and thick with bitter resentment. Defeated, I headed to my own room. I thought the worst of it, the acute awkwardness, was over. But as I passed the top of the stairs, I heard their voices low, conspiratorial tones drifting up from my father's locked study. I froze, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. It will be a complete and utter disaster for Chloe's psyche if she has to watch Julian succeed at that level first. My mother's voice was a venomous hiss. She's so fragile right now, Arthur. Seeing him at a top-tier medical school, while she's just at Oak Ridge, it will crush her. My father's reply was colder, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice he used for hostile corporate negotiations. I agree. It's an unacceptable outcome. We have to do something. I backed away from the stairs, a chill creeping down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway. Do something. What in God's name did that mean? I didn't have the answer then. But that quiet, menacing promise was the opening salvo in a war I never knew I was supposed to fight. A war for my own future, waged against my own flesh and blood. To really understand why my achievement was treated like a declaration of war, you have to understand the soil it grew in. My family wasn't just a family, it was a monarchy, and Chloe was the chosen heir. I was, at best, a member of the court, and at worst, a court jester whose only job was to make the princess feel better about herself. This wasn't a new development. It was the bedrock of our entire childhood. Chloe was the sun, I was a minor planet caught in her gravitational pull. She was vibrant, social, and effortlessly charming. I was the quiet one, the observer, the kid who would rather take apart a broken toaster than be the center of attention. Our parents interpreted this difference not as personality, but as a hierarchy. She was the one to be showcased, I was the one to be managed. Every milestone was carefully orchestrated to ensure Chloe's ego remained intact. Take our 10th birthday, for example. I had been obsessed with biology for months. All I wanted was a high-powered microscope. I had circled one in a catalog of beautiful, professional-grade starter model and left the catalog on the kitchen island for weeks. Chloe, in a fleeting phase, had decided she was into jewelry making. On our birthday morning, the living room was filled with gifts. Chloe's pile was a mountain of brightly wrapped boxes. Mine was a small, modest hill. She tore into hers, revealing expensive beads, silver wires, a professional kiln, my parents oohing and aahing at every reveal. Then it was my turn. I opened my gifts, clothes, a new backpack, some novels. All nice things, but no microscope. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried not to let my disappointment show. And one more for the birthday girl, my dad announced, pulling a large, heavy box from behind the sofa. It was the microscope, my microscope. He presented it to Chloe with a grand flourish. She looked at it, completely bewildered. A microscope? What am I supposed to do with this? My mother knelt down, her smile perfectly practiced. Well, honey, we know Julian loves this stuff. We thought it would be a fun thing for you two to do together. You can be the project manager. The message was clear as glass. My interests were only valid if they could be presented as a gift to her, a tool for family bonding that she would ultimately control. I spent that night teaching a completely bored Chloe how to focus the lens on a piece of onion skin, my heart a lead lump in my chest. She used the microscope exactly twice before it became an expensive stand for her necklaces in the back of her closet. This pattern repeated endlessly. The most defining moment was the regional robotics competition in the 8th grade. I'd spent 3 months meticulously building a working solar-powered rover. It had independent suspension, a motorized scoop, and a tiny camera. It was my absolute masterpiece. I won first place. I remember the weight of that heavy gold medal around my neck, a feeling of pure, unadulterated pride. Chloe had entered a hastily made papier-mâché volcano that barely fizzed. When her name wasn't called for any of the top prizes, the waterworks began. They weren't the dramatic sobs of real hurt, but the low, hiccuping, tactical tears she had perfected. They were a weapon, and my mother was her prime target. My mom found me by my project booth, her smile tight and strained. In front of my science teacher, in front of my peers, she whispered, "Julian, darling, look at your sister. She tried so hard. You know how sensitive she is. It would be such a kind, generous thing for you to let her wear your medal for the photos. It's just a piece of metal after all. Being a good brother is more important." The pressure was immense. All eyes were on me. Being a good brother meant erasing my own achievement. Refusing meant being the villain who made his sister cry. With trembling hands, I took the medal off my neck and handed it to her. The tears vanished instantly. My mother beamed. "That's my sweet boy." I didn't feel sweet, I felt invisible. My only true refuge was in the world of academics. It was logical, it was fair. The laws of physics didn't care who your parents liked more. It was in my AP biology class that I found a real ally, Dr. Sterling. He was a retired neurosurgeon who taught high school biology because, as he put it, he wanted to shape minds before they got ruined by the ego of medical school. He was sharp, intimidating, and he didn't suffer fools. And for some reason, he saw me. He saw the extra research I did, the questions I asked that went way beyond the curriculum. One afternoon, he kept me after class. The room was empty, smelling of whiteboard markers and formaldehyde. "Julian," he said, leaning against his heavy oak desk. "You have a mind for this. A real intuitive grasp of complex biological systems. It's not something you can teach. You either have it, or you don't." He paused, his eyes searching my face. "Tell me something, your parents, are they fostering this?" I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. They want us to be doctors," I mumbled, the us hanging heavily in the air. "Doctor?" Sterling nodded slowly, a deep, sad understanding in his gaze. "I see, the royal we." He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, intimidatingly dense medical textbook, Netter's Atlas of Human Anatomy. This was my companion through my first year of med school. "It's yours now. Don't tell your parents. Don't tell anyone. Just read it. Absorb it. Let it be our secret." And that book became my holy text. I would spend my lunch hours hidden in a dusty study carrel in the back of the school library, absorbing every page. My parents, meanwhile, were sinking a small fortune into elite private tutors for Chloe. Tutors who would arrive in expensive cars, tutors my mother would boast about at her tennis club. "Chloe is working with Dr. Vance from the university," she'd say loudly. "He thinks she has tremendous promise." I wasn't jealous of the tutoring itself. I was gutted by the blatant disparity in investment. They were betting on her. I was expected to figure it out entirely on my own. It was Dr. Sterling who pushed me to apply to Vanguard Institute of Medicine. I thought it was a joke. "They don't accept kids like me," I'd argued. "What? Kids who are brilliant but don't have a cheering section at home?" He countered with a wry smile. "Sometimes, Julian, that's exactly who they're looking for. Talent like yours has to carve its own path. Never, ever depend on the good graces of others to validate your worth. Your worth is inherent. Remember that." My other anchor was my older brother, Liam. He was 4 years my senior and had escaped to a college on the opposite side of the country the second he turned 18. He saw our family with the crystal clarity of distance. The summer before he left, he sat me down in his empty bedroom. "Jules," he said, his voice deadly serious. "I'm going to give you some advice, and I need you to listen. Mom and Dad have a massive blind spot named Chloe. They will always manage situations to protect her feelings, even if it means throwing you under the bus. You have to protect yourself." He leaned in closer. "Start a file. A secret one on your laptop. If they say something important, write it down. If there's a weird conversation, document it. Date, time, exact words. Sounds paranoid, I know. But data doesn't have feelings. Data is just the truth. And one day, you might need the truth on your side. It felt deeply cynical, like a spy movie, keeping a dossier on my own parents. But the look in his eyes was so urgent that I did it. I created a hidden folder named Insurance. For years, it sat there mostly empty, until now. After hearing them in the study that April night, my heart hammering against my ribs, I powered on my laptop. I opened the insurance folder and created a new text file. Date, April 14th. Time, approx 10:45 p.m. Subject, parental discussion regarding Vanguard acceptance. Overheard mother and father in the study. Mother stated my success would be a disaster for Chloe's psyche. Father stated, we have to do something. Implication, they intend to interfere with my enrollment at VIM to protect Chloe's ego. It was the first brick in the wall I would have to build to protect my own future. They had made their first move in the shadows. Now, thanks to Liam, I was ready to start turning on the lights. Update 1. The weeks following that night were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My parents didn't confront me directly. That would have been too honest. Instead, they waged a campaign of strategic neglect, designed to wear me down. Every time I brought up Vanguard, or a housing form I needed signed, or a question about the financial aid portal, the conversation would be deftly suffocated. My mother would suddenly remember an urgent phone call, or get a pained expression and sigh, Julian, please, can we not talk about all this college stress right now? It's been so hard on your sister. My father would simply become deaf, his attention consumed by a non-existent spot on the wall. They were trying to make my future so inconvenient to discuss that I would simply give up. Chloe leaned into her role as the fragile victim perfectly. She would sigh dramatically whenever I walked into a room. If I mentioned a book I was reading, she would murmur just loud enough for our parents to hear, it must be nice to be so naturally smart without having to try. It was a performance, and my parents were her captive audience. The inevitable explosion came at Sunday dinner. This was my father's preferred stage for family pronouncements. To make matters worse, my mother had invited her sister, Aunt Clara. Clara was a licensed family therapist, and my mother wielded her professional title like a shield, as if having a therapist eat our roast beef automatically made our toxic dynamic healthy. My father placed his knife and fork on his plate with a deliberate clink that silenced the room. Julian, he began, his voice dangerously calm. Your mother and I have been doing a great deal of thinking, and we've decided, we think the best path forward for the family is for you to attend Oak Ridge College. I stared at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. Oak Ridge? Why would I go to Oak Ridge? I got into the best medical program in the country. Oak Ridge is an excellent school. My mother interjected, her smile brittle. And the most important thing is that you and Chloe can be together. You can support each other. It's a built-in support system. Support her. I translated the words in my head. What she means is, I'll be her built-in tutor. Her academic life raft. I don't need a support system, I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly even. And neither does she. She got into Oak Ridge on her own. Me going to Vanguard doesn't change that. Don't be deliberately obtuse, Julian. My father's voice gained a hard, jagged edge. This isn't just about academics. This is about family solidarity. Your sister is going through a moment of profound disappointment. A good son, a good brother, would choose to stand by his sister, not abandon her to chase some pretentious brand name. Abandon her. I couldn't believe the gaslighting. I'm not abandoning her, I'm going to college. How is my success selfish? It's selfish because you are putting your own ego above the emotional well-being of this family. My mother cried, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. All of our friends at the club, they'll all be asking, where are the twins going? What are we supposed to tell them? That one ran off to an Ivy Tier school and the other one didn't? It makes it look like there's something wrong with her. With us. So, that was it. Not Chloe's feelings. It was their image, their social standing. My success was a public relations nightmare they needed to bury. Aunt Clara cleared her throat, sensing her cue. Now, Beatrice, Arthur, she said in her infuriatingly placid therapist tone. Let's try to hold space for Julian's feelings here. This is a tremendous achievement, and it's valid for him to feel proud. My mother's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing into slits. Clara, with all due respect, you are our guest. This is a private family matter. Aunt Clara wilted instantly, picking up her water glass and effectively removing herself from the line of fire. So much for professional intervention. I felt a surge of cold, absolute fury. I looked directly into my father's eyes. I am going to the Vanguard Institute of Medicine. He held my gaze, his eyes like chips of ice. Fine, he said, the word dropping like an anvil. That is your choice. But choices have consequences. If you choose to turn your back on this family, then you can choose to pay for your prestigious education yourself. As of this moment, you are completely cut off. Not one dime from me or your mother. Not for tuition, not for housing, not for a single textbook. You want to be an adult? Let's see how you handle it. He expected me to crumble. He saw an 18-year-old kid with a part-time job at a hardware store and no savings. Checkmate. But he didn't know about my secret weapon. He didn't know I had spent hours researching financial aid, Pell Grants, and student loans. I met his icy stare. Okay, I said, my voice shockingly steady, I'll handle it. The flicker of stunned disbelief in his eyes was the only victory I claimed that night. But the real attack, the one that proved this wasn't just about control, but outright sabotage, came 2 weeks later. It wasn't a threat delivered over dinner. It was a silent, digital assassination attempt. It started with an email from the Vanguard Financial Aid Office. The subject line read, "Urgent update, regarding your financial aid package." My heart pounded as I opened it. The email informed me that due to recently updated financial information provided by your family, my eligibility for the Vanguard Need-Based Grant was being re-evaluated. It stated that my expected family contribution, EFC, had significantly increased, and therefore, my $45,000 a year grant would likely be eliminated entirely. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Updated financial information? My dad's commercial real estate business was booming. What were they talking about? I spent an hour in a panicked haze searching online. Had his company tanked? Nothing. Then, Liam's voice echoed in my head. Data is power. I dialed his number, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice. Liam, it's me. They did something. I read him the email. He was silent for a long moment. Then he swore, a sharp, violent word. Those absolute bastards, he breathed. Jules, they didn't lose money. They lied. What do you mean they lied? There's a loophole, he explained, his voice a mix of fury and chilling, analytical calm. Parents can submit a professional judgment request to a financial aid office claiming a sudden, drastic change in circumstances. Job loss, high medical bills, or massive business deductions. Dad is self-employed. He probably submitted an amended Schedule C, showing massive, fabricated business losses for the current quarter. They're deliberately tanking your financial aid package from the inside. The sheer, calculated malice of it took my breath away. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated, strategic strike designed to make my dream financially impossible. They weren't just refusing to help, they were actively, secretly working to destroy me. Why? Was all I could whisper. Because if you can't afford Vanguard, you have to come crawling back to them, Liam said grimly. You have to accept their terms. You have to go to Oak Ridge. They're taking all your other choices away. Jules. This is war. I hung up the phone and ran to the bathroom, dry heaving into the sink. My body convulsed from the sheer shock and betrayal. After a few minutes, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale. But behind the fear, I saw a flicker of something else. A hard, diamond-cold anger that burned away the panic. I walked back to my room, sat at my laptop, and opened the insurance folder. I saved a PDF of the email. I documented the phone call with Liam. I was no longer a son. I was a plaintiff building an airtight case against my own blood. The next morning, I made the most terrifying phone call of my life. I called the Vanguard Financial Aid Office. I was an 18-year-old kid about to accuse my wealthy, powerful parents of committing federal fraud against a top-tier university. When a polite woman named Mrs. Vance answered, I took a deep breath. Good morning, I said, forcing my voice to drop an octave to sound older. My name is Julian Evans. I'm calling about a re-evaluation of my financial aid package. I explained the situation as clinically as possible. I didn't use the word sabotage. I said, I have reason to believe that the updated financial information the university received via the professional judgment request is entirely fraudulent. My initial aid offer was based on my parents' official tax returns, which I have physical copies of. To my knowledge, their financial situation has not negatively changed. In fact, my father's firm just closed a major plaza development. Mrs. Vance was quiet. I could hear the frantic clicking of a keyboard. Julian, this is a highly unusual and delicate accusation. Legally, since they filed the paperwork, we have to process it. My heart sank. The legal wall. However, she continued, the integrity of our aid process is paramount. Please hold. The hold music was a tinny classical piece that grated on my raw nerves. Each second felt like an hour. But the voice that returned was not hers. It was a man's, deep and authoritative. Julian, this is Dr. Mehta, the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid. I pulled your file. I remember your application personally. Your essay on CRISPR technology was one of the most insightful I've read this decade. We want you at Vanguard. His voice was incredibly validating. Given the severity of your claim, and the fact that you are legally 18, I am personally placing a temporary freeze on any changes to your package. The grant you were offered is secure for now. We will require a formal, notarized statement from you to permanently seal the file against further parental amendments. I had won the battle. The grant was safe. But it only covered half the cost. The rest was a vast, terrifying ocean of debt I had no way to cross. My father's threat to cut me off was still a loaded gun pointed at my head. I knew my next move. Update 2. That Saturday, I drove 2 hours out of the city to my grandparents' estate. Margaret and Winston Evans were cut from a completely different cloth than my father. My grandfather had built a massive manufacturing and real estate empire from a single machine shop. They were pragmatic, razor-sharp, and valued grueling hard work above the flimsy currency of country club social standing. They had always been kind to me, but distant. Today, I was going to force them to see me. I didn't show up crying. I didn't show up complaining. I showed up wearing a suit, carrying a leather briefcase Liam had mailed me. I sat them down in their sun-drenched library, the room smelling of old paper and lemon polish. I'm not here to complain about my father, I began, my voice clear and steady. I'm here to present a business proposal. I opened the briefcase and laid everything out on the mahogany table. My acceptance letter to Vanguard, the fraudulent financial aid email, the W-2s and tax documents I had quietly copied from my father's unlocked home office, the insurance file detailing the conversations. Then, I presented a detailed, line-item spreadsheet. I had calculated everything down to the penny: tuition, double occupancy dorm fees, meal plans, textbooks, even a budget for laundry and subway passes. I am not asking for a gift, I said, looking my formidable grandfather directly in the eye. I am asking for a loan. I have drafted a legal contract here. It proposes a 6% interest rate, and stipulates a repayment plan beginning 6 months after my medical residency ends. I am asking you to be my angel investors. My grandfather, Winston, a man who routinely negotiated $100 million deals, picked up my spreadsheet. He studied it without a word, his face a stern, unreadable mask. My grandmother, Margaret, who had managed the company's books for 40 years, read my homemade loan contract, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence was deafening. If they said no, my dream was dead. Finally, my grandfather placed the paper down. He looked at my grandmother, exchanging a long, silent look that contained 1,000 unspoken words. Then he turned his piercing gray eyes to me. Your father, Winston said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, always had a weak spine. He cared more about the shine on his shoes than the dirt on his hands. He forgot that a man's worth is what he builds, not what he pretends to be. My grandmother folded the contract and pushed it back across the table. We will not be your investors, Julian, she said. My stomach plummeted through the floor. Because an investment implies a risk, she continued, a small, sharp smile touching the corner of her lips. And you, my dear boy, are not a risk. You are the surest bet in this entire room. She paused, letting the relief wash over me. We will not give you a loan. We will, however, be establishing the Julian Evans Educational Trust. It will be funded tomorrow to cover your entire educational and living expenses for the next 8 years of your medical training. The funds will be dispersed directly to you, under your sole legal control. Think of it as an advance on your inheritance. An investment in a legacy of competence, rather than the legacy of appearances your father is so desperate to maintain. I was floored. Utterly speechless. I just stared at them, my mouth agape. My grandfather stood up, walked over to the antique telephone on his desk, and dialed a number from memory. Marcus, he barked into the receiver. Listen to me. I am instructing you to immediately liquidate my entire equity position in the Kensington Plaza project. Yes, all of it. I want it done by market close on Monday. No, the market fundamentals are fine. My personal priorities regarding my son have shifted. That's all you need to know. Make it hurt. He hung up the phone. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. In a single, calm, 60-second phone call, my grandfather had just pulled $12 million of vital funding out of my father's most prestigious, career-defining commercial real estate project. It was a declaration of war, fought not with angry words, but with the cold, brutal, world-ending language of capital. A message my father would understand perfectly. Update 3. The first year at Vanguard was like stepping out of a suffocating, black and white movie into glorious Technicolor. For 18 years, my world had been a claustrophobic stage where I played a supporting character I never auditioned for. Here, I was just Julian. I was surrounded by brilliant people who didn't know my sister, didn't care about my parents' country club, and only cared about the work. I found my tribe immediately: Maya, a whip-smart girl from rural Oregon, and Elias, a hilariously cynical guy from Chicago. We bonded over a disastrous organic chemistry lab where we nearly set a fume hood on fire. Academically, I was thriving. The years I'd spent teaching myself from Dr. Sterling's stolen textbook gave me a massive advantage. I found a new mentor in Dr. Eris, a brilliant, no-nonsense researcher who offered me a coveted spot in her lab studying CRISPR applications for Huntington's disease. I was doing real science. Meanwhile, the silence from my parents was absolute. My father's prized Kensington project had completely stalled after my grandfather pulled the funding, becoming a massive public embarrassment in his social circles. According to Liam, the atmosphere at home was apocalyptic. They had tried a few last-ditch efforts: a guilt-laden voicemail from my mother, a terse email from my father offering to reconsider his stance if I apologized. I deleted both. Their power over me was gone, and they were terrified of it. I thought it was all over, but the universe had one last, spectacular act of karma in store for me. In late May, I received an email informing me I had been selected as the sole recipient of the Dean's Award for First-Year Research Excellence. It was a massive honor, and it came with a presentation at the prestigious, black-tie annual Vanguard Gala. Out of a deeply ingrained, frankly stupid sense of familial obligation, I emailed my parents to tell them. I expected them to ignore it, but I underestimated their obsession with appearances. This was a command performance. They had to show up, dressed in their finest, and play the role of the proud, supportive parents to quell the rumors spreading through their social circles about their estranged son. The night of the ceremony was surreal. The grand ballroom of the downtown hotel was dripping with crystal chandeliers, filled with the intellectual and financial titans of the medical world. I saw my parents near the back, holding champagne flutes, their faces arranged in masks of pleasant interest. My father in his tailored tuxedo, my mother in a tasteful designer gown. They looked like perfect strangers playing a part. When my name was called for the research award, I walked up to the massive stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted the heavy glass plaque. I looked out into the crowd and saw my parents clapping politely, their smiles as brittle as spun glass. They had done their PR duty, but the night was far from over. The dean returned to the podium. And now, his voice boomed through the sound system. It is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker. He is a pioneer in neurosurgery, a Vanguard alumnus, and a dedicated philanthropist. Please welcome Dr. Robert Sterling. My head whipped around so fast my neck cracked. Dr. Sterling. My high school biology teacher. He walked onto the stage, exuding calm, unshakable authority. He scanned the audience, and for one brief, electric second, his eyes met mine. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A secret message just for me. He began his speech, speaking of innovation and the future of medicine. Then, his tone shifted, becoming deeply intimate. But the greatest challenge for any brilliant student, he said, his gaze sweeping over the room of wealthy donors, is not always found in a laboratory. Sometimes, the most daunting obstacle is simply surviving the people who are supposed to protect you. A hush fell over the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents. They were no longer smiling. This year, I launched the Sterling Foundation Scholarship, he continued, his voice ringing with passion. It is a full-ride, 4-year endowment designed to champion a student who has faced down profound adversity and simply refused to be denied their destiny. In reviewing the applications, one story seized our attention. A young man with staggering intellect, who wrote not of poverty, but of a silent, psychological war fought within his own home. The air in the ballroom was so thick you could choke on it. I dared to glance at my parents. Their faces were ashen. Stark white. Their smiles were completely gone, replaced by identical masks of dawning, inescapable horror. Dr. Sterling hadn't used my name yet, but he was painting a vivid, undeniable portrait of their abuse for a room full of the exact elite peers my parents spent their lives trying to impress. This young man's parents actively conspired to submit fraudulent financial documents to this very university to destroy his scholarship, simply because his brilliance was inconvenient to their preferred family narrative. Dr. Sterling's voice echoed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He fought back with nothing but the truth and an unbreakable spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, the first ever recipient of the Sterling Foundation Scholarship is Mr. Julian Evans. Silence. For one heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. Then, the applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a roar. A thunderous, rolling wave of sound. The entire hall surged to its feet in a standing ovation. Maya and Elias were screaming my name. My grandparents, who had flown in without telling me, were on their feet, my grandmother weeping openly. The spotlight found me, pinning me in its blinding glare. As I walked up to the stage to shake Dr. Sterling's hand, I looked out into the sea of faces and found my parents. They were standing, they had no choice. The entire room of billionaires, deans, and elite doctors was standing, and they were trapped. They were clapping, their hands moving in jerky, mechanical motions. Their faces were frozen in a grotesque, agonizing parody of pride. They were trapped in a public nightmare of their own making, forced to participate in the deafening public worship of the very sun they had tried to break. Dr. Sterling grasped my hand firmly. He leaned in close, his voice a fierce whisper. You carved your own path, Julian, now go blind them with your light. That was my victory. It wasn't a quiet argument in a living room. It was a symphony of public, undeniable, absolute destruction of their false image. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I swiped to answer, feeling nothing but cold calm. Julian, his voice was hollow, stripped of all its booming authority. It was the voice of a man utterly defeated. That was quite a spectacle tonight. Your mother is inconsolable. That man. He made us look like monsters. He told the truth, Arthur, I replied, my voice even. He just did it in a ballroom instead of a courtroom. He was silent. He wanted me to scream, to rage, to give him an opening to call me hysterical. I denied him the battle. What do you want, Dad? I asked. I want my family back. I want things to go back to how they were. That's never going to happen, I said, with absolute finality. The dynamic where my worth is a sacrifice for Chloe's ego is dead. The parents who forged federal documents to ruin their son's life are dead to me. If you ever want a relationship with me, it will be on my terms. As an adult, you will respect me, or you will never speak to me again. I didn't wait for his answer. I just hung up. The silence in my dorm room wasn't lonely. It was the sound of total, absolute peace. Update 4. The final closure. It's been a few years since that night. I'm now in my residency, working grueling 36-hour shifts, and I have never been happier. My parents' social standing never recovered. The story of what they did became legendary gossip, and my father's firm quietly downsized after my grandfather permanently cut ties with him. But the final piece of understanding came from an unexpected source, my Aunt Helen, my father's estranged sister. We met for coffee last year, and she slid an old photograph across the table. It showed a young, timid version of my father standing next to a taller, charismatic boy who looked just like him. That's your Uncle Jonathan, Helen told me softly. He was the golden child. Valedictorian, star athlete, brilliant. Your father spent his entire life in Jonathan's shadow, feeling like a worthless disappointment. Jonathan died in a car crash at 20. Your father was devastated, but I think he was also relieved. The shadow was gone. She looked at me with profound sadness. When he saw you, Julian, he saw Jonathan. Your natural brilliance terrified him. And when he looked at Chloe, he saw himself. He rigged the game because he swore he would never let his daughter feel the way he did. He became the monster he hated to protect her. It didn't excuse a single thing he did. But it finally made sense. The anger I carried cooled into a deep, weary pity. As for Chloe, she actually failed out of Oak Ridge her sophomore year. Without me to serve as her scapegoat, she collapsed under the weight of expectations she could never meet. She called me one night, sobbing real, ragged tears admitting she couldn't do it. For the first time, I didn't feel resentment. I just felt pity for a girl who had been lied to her whole life. I spent hours on the phone, teaching her how to study. She eventually switched to nursing, a field she actually loves, and she is thriving. Last week, I received a handwritten letter from her. Julian, I am so sorry. I loved being the favorite, and I let them use my feelings to hold you back because it benefited me. I finally see it all. You refusing to give up your award wasn't you trying to humiliate me, it was you finally refusing to erase yourself. I am so incredibly proud of the man you've become. Love, Chloe. I stood by the window of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. Power isn't something people can give you or take away. Real power is the quiet, unshakable belief in your own worth, built brick by painful brick in the dark. And once you build it, no one can ever tear it down. My dad bought my cousin a $38,000 Dodge Challenger with my dead mom's trust fund. So I handed him a lawsuit and let the bank take everything he owned. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Most of them get quiet around the part with the train schedule. Some laugh nervously because they think I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect. I promise you, I'm not. My name is Liam. I'm 24 years old, and I own my own home. I have a career in supply chain management that I built from absolutely nothing, a life I am fiercely proud of, and a chosen family that consists of exactly the people who earned the right to be there. But 6 years ago, on the morning of my 18th birthday, I was standing in my father's kitchen holding a cheap, waxy transit schedule, while my cousin Mason was outside revving a murdered-out Dodge Challenger with a massive red bow slapped on the hood. Let me back up, so this all makes sense. My mom passed away when I was 15, breast cancer. She fought it tooth and nail for 3 brutal years, and I had to watch her get smaller and more fragile every single month until there just wasn't enough of her left to keep fighting. She was the absolute center of our universe. She was the reason our house functioned. She was the one who remembered my science fairs, who drove me to baseball practice in the freezing rain, who sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. My dad, Arthur, was there physically during her illness, but emotionally, he checked out long before she actually died. And after the funeral, he didn't bother checking back in. What he did instead was lean entirely into his younger sister, Clara's, Fanzeri family. Aunt Clara had a son exactly my age named Mason. Mason's dad had walked out when he was 4, and Clara had raised him alone. Somewhere along the way during my mother's decline, my dad decided that Mason was the kid who really needed a father figure. I watched my own replacement happen in real time. Mason got invited on weekend fishing trips. Mason got top-of-the-line baseball cleats when the spring season started. Mason got my dad's arm slung proudly around his shoulder at Thanksgiving dinner, while I sat quietly at the opposite end of the table, pushing cold mashed potatoes around my plate. I want to be completely fair and objective here. My dad didn't scream at me. He didn't hit me. He wasn't overtly abusive in the traditional sense. He just made it crystal clear, through 1,000 tiny, daily choices, that I was no longer his priority. And Aunt Clara? She absolutely fed into it. She was a master manipulator, always whispering in his ear. Mason really looks up to you, Arthur. Mason desperately needs a male role model. You know Liam can handle himself, he's always been so independent. That last line was her absolute favorite weapon. Independent. She used it like it was a glowing compliment and not a tragic diagnosis of a kid who had been abandoned. By the time I was 16, I was cooking my own dinners, doing my own laundry, and getting myself to and from high school. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to prove how tough I was, I did it because if I didn't, no one else was going to do it. My dad paid the mortgage and kept the electricity on. I will give him credit for that. But beyond basic, bare minimum survival, I was completely on my own. Mason, meanwhile, was getting the premium father-son experience. A new iPhone every single year, expensive trips to Florida theme parks, a $3,000 custom gaming PC setup for Christmas. And my dad paid for all of it with this smug, self-satisfied expression on his face, like pouring money into his nephew made him a saint. Here's the honest truth, I didn't hate Mason back then. He was just a kid, same as me. He didn't ask for the blatant favoritism. He just swam in it because it was the only water he knew. We weren't close, but we weren't bitter enemies either. Sometimes, during those excruciating family dinners, he'd look over at me with this flicker of guilt in his eyes. It was like he could feel the massive imbalance in the room but lacked the emotional vocabulary to articulate it. Aunt Clara, though? I understood her perfectly. She was one of those toxic people who could slice you open with an insult while flashing a pristine smile. She'd say things like, "Liam, you're always so quiet and withdrawn, just like your poor mother was toward the bitter end." Or, "You know, Mason got straight B's this semester. Isn't that just wonderful, Liam?" She would stare directly into my eyes, fully expecting me to applaud my cousin for doing the bare minimum, while completely ignoring the fact that I was pulling straight A's while working a part-time job. But I kept my mouth shut. I went to high school, kept my grades pristine, worked 25 hours a week at a local hardware store, and hoarded every single dollar I made into a shoebox in my closet. I didn't know exactly what I was saving for yet. I just knew that whatever came next in my life, I needed to be financially bulletproof. Then came October 12th, my 18th birthday. I came downstairs that morning, the house deadly quiet. My dad was sitting at the kitchen island with a mug of black coffee, blindly scrolling through his phone. There was no birthday card, no wrapping paper, no cake. Just him, the coffee, and the silence. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. He finally looked up, barely registering my presence, and muttered, "Happy birthday." "Thanks," I said, my voice flat. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans, pulled out a folded, laminated piece of paper, and slid it across the marble counter. I opened it. It was a local transit schedule. The train lines printed on that cheap, waxy paper. He had taken a red Sharpie and circled line 7, the route that ran from our suburban neighborhood straight to the local community college. "Time to be a man," he said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "You're 18 now. The world's not going to hand you anything on a silver platter." I stood there and stared at the red circle. Not because I was shocked. Deep down, a part of me had been bracing for something exactly like this. What made my chest tighten, what made the blood roar in my ears, was the memory of 3 weeks earlier when Mason had turned 18. Mason's party had catered food and 30 guests. Aunt Clara had baked a massive custom cake. And the grand finale? My dad walking Mason outside, handing him the keys to a pitch-black Dodge Challenger, and telling him, "You earned this, buddy." A $38,000 muscle car for Mason. A $2.50 transit schedule for me. I didn't yell. I folded the schedule perfectly in half, slipped it into my back pocket, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Okay." My dad actually blinked in surprise. I know for a fact he expected me to argue, to scream, maybe even cry. That would have given him the perfect opening to deliver some condescending, rehearsed speech about tough love and the real world. But I completely denied him that satisfaction. "Okay," he repeated, sounding slightly thrown off. "Yeah. Okay." I turned around, walked upstairs to my bedroom, packed 2 duffel bags with everything that mattered to me, and called the one single person in my life who had never treated me like an inconvenience. My mom's older brother, Uncle Julian. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, Liam. Happy birthday, kiddo. You still coming over for dinner tonight?" "Actually," I said, my voice finally cracking just a little. "Can I come over right now, and maybe stay for a long while?" There was a heavy pause on the line. Uncle Julian was a retired structural engineer. He was methodical, intensely careful, and never rushed a single decision in his life. But when he finally spoke, his voice was like steel. Your room has been ready for 3 years. Come home, kid. I didn't leave a dramatic note, I didn't slam any doors. I carried my bags down the stairs, walked right past my dad who was still sitting at the exact same spot at the island, and said, I'll be staying at Uncle Julian's. He didn't even stand up to stop me. Julian lived in a clean, quiet 2-bedroom apartment on the opposite side of the city. It smelled like old books and fresh coffee. After my mom passed, he was the only person on earth who called me on her birthday just to say he was thinking of me. He was the only adult who asked how I was actually doing and waited to hear the real answer. That night, after we ate takeout pizza, Julian handed me a small, velvet box. Inside was a vintage silver watch with a cracked leather band. That was your mother's, he said softly. She bought it for herself after her very first promotion. She told me before she passed that she wanted you to have it the second you turned 18. I put it on my wrist and I swear to you, I didn't take it off for 4 years. We sat on his small balcony in the crisp October air, and he said something that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life. Your mom set things up for you, Liam. She was brilliant. Much smarter than Arthur ever gave her credit for. What do you mean, set things up? I asked, confused. He hesitated, rubbing his jaw. We'll talk about it when you're settled. Let's just get through tonight. I let it go, but it gnawed at the back of my mind. 2 weeks later, while I was unpacking the very last box of my childhood things, I found a sealed white envelope wedged deep inside the lining of my mom's old wooden jewelry box. It was addressed to me in her unmistakable, elegant handwriting. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a printout from a major bank, showing a trust and savings account in both my name and my dad's name. The balance, dated exactly 7 years ago, was $145,500. I stopped breathing. I read the numbers 4 times. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared blankly at the wall until my vision blurred. My mother had left me money, real, life-changing, foundational money, and I had never seen a single solitary cent of it. She had carefully hidden this statement, knowing that eventually, someday, I would find it. The next morning, I slammed the paper down on Uncle Julian's kitchen table. He put on his reading glasses, looked at the document, and went completely motionless. I was wondering when you were going to find this, he sighed. You knew about this money? I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of betrayal and hope. I knew your mother set up a custodial account. It was a mix of a life insurance payout and savings she had been secretly hoarding since you were a toddler. She told me about it 6 months before the cancer took her. She said it was strictly for your college tuition, your first house down payment, or whatever you needed to launch your life. Then why didn't you tell me? I yelled. Julian took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. Because Arthur was the legal co-signer. Your mom had to put him on the account so he could manage the funds until you turned 18. I assumed stupidly, I admit that he was letting it grow for you. I didn't want to accuse him of financial abuse without proof and ruin whatever fragile relationship you two had left. I could hear the crushing guilt in his voice. I need to know exactly what is in that account right now, I said. Julian nodded. Get your coat. Because I was legally 18 and my name was on the account, the bank had to give me access. Julian drove me to the main branch, and we sat in a glass-walled office with a branch manager named Brenda. She typed my social security number into her computer, clicked a few buttons, and turned the monitor toward us. The current balance was $9,240.15. I will remember those digits until the day I die. $145,500 had been whittled down to $9,240.15. Over $136,000 was completely gone. Vanished. Can I see the entire withdrawal history? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Brenda looked at Julian with wide eyes, then back at me. She hit print. The machine spat out 15 pages of transaction records. Julian and I sat in his parked car for 2 hours, going through every single line item with a highlighter. The bleeding started exactly 16 months after my mom died. It started small. $1,500 here. $2,200 there. Then, the numbers exploded. $4,000 in December of the year. Mason turned 1,500, the exact cost of the gaming PC and his Christmas haul. $18,000 withdrawn on April 12. What happened in April? I asked. Julian pointed a trembling finger at the date. That was the exact week your Aunt Clara closed on her new townhouse. It was all there. Every single major withdrawal perfectly aligned with a massive purchase Aunt Clara or Mason had flaunted. But the final nail in the coffin was the $38,500 wire transfer that had been initiated exactly 1 month before my 18th birthday. The exact sticker price of a Dodge Challenger. My father had literally bought his nephew a muscle car using the money my dying mother had desperately saved to protect me. He had funded his sister's real estate and his nephew's lavish lifestyle using the safety net my mother bled for. The train schedule wasn't a lesson in tough love. It was the punchline to a six-figure theft. I didn't call my dad. I knew if I heard his voice in that moment, I would end up in a police car. Instead, I channeled my mother's quiet, terrifying focus. I got relentlessly organized. I enrolled at the community college that fall, taking the exact Line 7 train my dad had circled. I rode that train every single day with that laminated schedule burning a hole in my pocket. I worked 35 hours a week at the hardware store and picked up grueling night shifts at a warehouse loading docks. I kept my expenses at absolute zero, kept my GPA at a 4, and kept my mouth completely shut. My dad called me exactly once, about 2 months after I left. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. "You still mooching off Julian?" "Yeah." "You planning on coming home?" "No." A heavy sigh. "Suit yourself, kid." And he hung up. "No, I miss you." "No, let's work this out." Just annoyance that his prop was missing. Aunt Clara called once, too. "Liam, your father is just sick with worry over you," she lied seamlessly. "Mason has been asking about you constantly. You really need to stop this childish rebellion. Family is everything, Liam. Your mother would be devastated to see you abandoning your father like this." I gripped my phone so hard the screen almost cracked. "Do not ever speak my mother's name again." She gasped, offended. "I am just trying to keep this family together." "Goodbye, Clara," I said, and blocked her number. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 4 solid years. During those 4 years, I executed my plan flawlessly. I transferred to a state university on a full academic scholarship. I finished my degree in supply chain management. I graduated with zero debt because I worked night shifts the entire time. Uncle Julian refused to charge me rent, but I kept a meticulous Excel spreadsheet of every utility bill and grocery run he paid for, vowing to pay him back. By the time I was 23, I was hired as a regional logistics director for a major distribution firm. I was making exceptional money, living in a nice apartment, and quietly stacking cash for a house down payment. I had completely ghosted my father's side of the family. And then, on a random Tuesday, Uncle Julian called me. "Liam, we have a situation. Aunt Clara is throwing a massive 50th birthday party at the Oak Ridge Country Club next month. Rented out the whole ballroom. And the family grapevine is buzzing. Your dad has been telling everyone who will listen that he expects you to be there." "Why would he think I'd show up?" I asked. "Because," Julian said, his voice dripping with disgust, "he has spent the last 4 years rewriting history. He's been telling the extended family that you've been away at an elite school, and that he personally funded your entire education. He's taking full credit for your success, Liam. He's using your accomplishments to play the role of the ultimate, sacrificial father." I let out a dark, hollow laugh. "There's more," Julian said softly. I had Brenda look at the account again. 3 months ago, Arthur went into the branch. He drained the remaining $9,240. The account is at zero. He closed it out. He had taken the last scrap of my mother's legacy to likely fund Clara's extravagant country club birthday bash. "Julian," I said, staring at the framed train schedule I kept on my desk, "it's time to call the lawyer." Julian set me up with a woman named Sarah Vance. She was a ruthless, no-nonsense fiduciary litigator who worked out of a sterile, heavily air-conditioned office downtown. I handed her my meticulously organized binder, the bank statements, the withdrawal timeline, the receipts, and the crown jewel, a notarized copy of my mother's will that Julian had kept locked in a safe. The will explicitly designated the account as a custodial asset for my exclusive benefit, explicitly naming Arthur as a fiduciary manager, not a joint owner with discretionary spending power. Sarah reviewed the documents in total silence for 20 minutes. When she finally looked up, she smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Your father committed a textbook breach of fiduciary duty. He misappropriated roughly $136,000 of protected assets. With statutory interest and legal penalties, we are looking at a demand of over $160,000. We have him dead to rights. He either pays, or we destroy him in civil court." "Draft the demand letter," I said, "but don't mail it yet. I have a party to attend first." Update 1. The Oak Ridge Country Club was dripping with fake wealth. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, open bars. Clara had invited over 80 people. I walked in wearing a tailored charcoal suit and my mother's silver watch. I looked incredibly successful, and more importantly, I looked untouchable. My dad spotted me near the ice sculpture. To my absolute horror, his face lit up with a massive, performative smile. He marched across the room, threw his arms open, and pulled me into a suffocating hug. "Liam, my boy. Look at you," he boomed, making sure the surrounding relatives heard him. He grabbed my shoulders and turned to his friends. "I told you my kid was a superstar, paid every dime of his tuition, and look at the return on investment." I felt violently ill, but I forced a smile. "Good to see you, Arthur." Mason walked over a few minutes later, holding a craft beer. He had bulked up, wearing a flashy designer blazer and a Rolex that probably cost more than my first year of college. Liam, bro, it's been forever. We shook hands. The weirdest part? Mason seemed genuinely thrilled to see me. He was completely oblivious to the rotting foundation his life was built on. Aunt Clara floated over in a sequined gown, kissing both my cheeks. Liam, darling. I am so incredibly blessed you came. This family is finally whole again. She gestured to the room like a proud queen surveying her kingdom. She genuinely believed the delusion. She believed Arthur was a saint, Mason was a genius, and I was just the quiet kid who finally learned his place. After dinner, Clara tapped her champagne glass. She gave a tearful, 10-minute speech about family, sacrifice, and how her brother Arthur had been her rock. Then, she looked directly at me. And we are so honored to have Liam here tonight. Liam, sweetheart, you've always been so bright. Would you like to say a few words about your father? The entire ballroom went dead silent. 80 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I stood up slowly. I picked up my glass of club soda. I looked at Clara, then at Mason, and finally, I locked eyes with my father. Thank you, Clara, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I'll keep this brief. I want to raise a glass to the people who actually invested in my future. To the people who didn't just talk about family, but actually lived it. To the people who didn't steal to survive, and didn't lie to save face. You know exactly who you are. I raised my glass. To the truth. The room hesitated. A few confused people clinked their glasses. Clara looked bewildered. But my dad? All the color instantly drained from his face. His jaw went slack. For one fraction of a second, the mask completely slipped, and I saw pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. He knew. I set my glass down, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the ballroom without another word. The very next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, Sarah Vance mailed the demand letter via certified priority mail. The letter was a masterpiece of legal violence. It outlined the exact origin of the trust, cited my mother's will, listed every single fraudulent withdrawal with agonizing precision, and cross-referenced them with Clara's townhouse deed and Mason's DMV car registration. It formally demanded the immediate restitution of $162,450, principal plus interest and legal fees. It gave Arthur exactly 30 days to comply before we filed a massive civil lawsuit that would freeze his bank accounts and likely trigger a criminal fraud investigation. My phone rang at exactly 11:14 a.m. on Tuesday. It was my dad. What the hell is this, Liam? His voice wasn't the booming, proud father from the party. It was the vicious, cold man I remembered from my childhood. It's a demand letter, Arthur. I suggest you read it carefully. You hired a vicious attack dog lawyer to sue your own flesh and blood, over a joint account. I had every legal right to manage that money. Manage it? I laughed coldly. You bought Mason a Dodge Challenger. You paid for Clara's down payment. You funded your pathetic need to be worshipped by your sister. That was my mother's life insurance, Arthur, and I want every single penny back. You don't understand. He screamed, his voice cracking. Clara was going to be homeless. Mason needed a reliable car for school. I made the hard choices to protect this family. And look at you. You're rich. You're successful. My tough love worked. You didn't even need the money. The sheer audacity of his mental gymnastics left me breathless. I am successful because of Uncle Julian, because of my dead mother, and because I worked 80-hour weeks while you played pretend dad with Mason. I'll see you in court, Arthur. I hung up. 2 hours later, Clara called. She was hysterical. Liam, what kind of sick, twisted lies is Julian feeding you? Your father sacrificed everything for us. You are destroying this family over pure greed. Your mother is looking down on you with absolute shame. I didn't yell. I just spoke with icy precision. April 12th, $14,000 transferred from my trust. April 15th, you closed on your townhouse on Elm Street. Do you want me to read the exact wire transfer routing number, Clara? Because I have it right here. My mother isn't ashamed of me. She's disgusted that her cancer payout bought your living room furniture. She let out a choked, horrifying gasp and hung up. Update 2. The family completely imploded. Clara had foolishly complained to the extended family about my fake lawsuit, which prompted my lawyer to accidentally on purpose send copies of the bank statements to a few key gossiping aunts to clarify the legal parameters. Within 48 hours, everyone knew my dad was a thief. Half the family blocked his number. The other half demanded he pay me back. My dad hired a cheap strip mall lawyer to fight back, claiming the statute of limitations had passed. Sarah Vance completely annihilated him in a single email, citing 3 state Supreme Court precedents regarding delayed discovery and fiduciary fraud. His lawyer essentially told him he was going to be slaughtered in front of a judge. On day 28 of the 30-day notice, my dad caved. He didn't have $162,000 in liquid cash. So, Sarah forced him to liquidate his life. He was forced to sell his prized 2020 Winnebago RV, which he sold at a massive $15,000 loss just to get the cash fast. He had to sell his Chevy Silverado and buy a beat-up, 12-year-old Honda Civic. He drained his entire retirement brokerage account. We settled for $140,000. He paid $85,000 upfront from the fire sale of his assets, and his wages are now legally garnished for the remaining $55,000 over the next 4 years. If he misses a single payment, Sarah gets to place a lien on his house. Clara completely cut contact with him because he couldn't fund her lifestyle anymore. The irony is poetic. He ruined his relationship with his actual son to buy the love of a sister who abandoned him the second the money dried up. But the most shocking twist came 2 weeks after the settlement was signed. I was sitting in my living room when there was a knock at my door. It was pouring rain. I opened it to find Mason standing on my porch, completely soaked, looking like a ghost. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice shaking. I stepped aside. He walked into my kitchen, reached inside his wet jacket, and pulled out a folded cashier's check. He placed it on my counter and slowly slid it toward me. I looked at it. It was a check made out to me for $26,000. "Mason, what is this?" I asked, completely stunned. "I sold the Challenger," he whispered, staring at the floor. "I got 26 grand for it. I didn't know, Liam. I swear to God, I didn't know where the money came from." He told me he had been saving up from his bonuses. When my mom told me about the lawsuit, I called him. I forced him to tell me the truth. Mason looked up at me, and his eyes were bloodshot and brimming with tears. "Every time I drove that car, I was driving your mom's ghost. I was driving the money that was supposed to keep you safe. I can't give you back the vacations. I can't give you back the computers, but I can give you this. Please take it, please." I stared at my cousin. The golden child. The boy who had unknowingly stolen my life. And in that moment, I didn't see an enemy. I just saw another victim of Arthur and Clara's toxic manipulation. "Thank you, Mason," I said quietly, picking up the check. We sat in my kitchen for 3 hours, drinking coffee and talking. Really talking. Without Clara's poison or Arthur's shadow hanging over us, we aren't best friends, and we have a lot of baggage to unpack, but we are slowly building a relationship on our own terms. As for me, I used the settlement money to officially pay off my mortgage. I am 24, completely debt-free, and living in a beautiful home. I went to Uncle Julian's house last week and handed him a check for $20,000 to cover every single grocery bill, electric bill, and drop of gas he spent on me during my college years. He cried, hugged me, and told me my mother would be unbelievably proud of the man I've become. I have a home office now. Above my desk, right next to my mother's silver watch, I have a small picture frame. Inside it is a cheap, waxy, faded transit schedule with a red circle drawn around line 7. It's not a symbol of bitterness. It's a daily reminder of exactly what I was handed, and exactly what I built despite it. Every morning, I look at it, smile, and think, "Thanks for the route, Arthur." Top comments. User 1. I am a 40-year-old man and I am literally crying at my desk reading the part about Mason bringing you the check. That kid was manipulated his whole life, but the second he learned the truth, he did the right thing. He sold his dream car to make it right. Your dad and aunt are garbage, but Mason broke the cycle. OP reply. It was a surreal moment. I harbored a lot of quiet resentment toward Mason for years, but seeing him standing in the rain, completely shattered by what our parents did, it changed everything. He drives an old Toyota Corolla now, and he's never been prouder of a car. User 2, as a lawyer, I am standing up and clapping for Sarah Vance. The absolute precision of waiting until after the big 50th birthday party to drop a nuclear demand letter is the level of petty professionalism I aspire to. Also, your dad claiming he made you independent is prime narcissist behavior. He didn't make you strong, you survived his neglect. User 3, I'm so glad you paid Uncle Julian back. That man stepped up when your own father threw you away. But I have to ask, has Arthur tried to contact you since the wage garnishment started? OP reply, he tried calling once from an unknown number to complain that the $1,145 monthly garnishment was making it hard for him to afford groceries. I told him I heard line 7 is a very affordable way to get to the food bank, and hung up. User 4, the fact that Aunt Clara completely dumped your dad the second he was broke is the most predictable, satisfying karma ever. They deserve each other's misery. You handled this with absolute class, Liam. Your mom was definitely looking out for you. User 5, frame that train schedule in gold, King. You took the absolute worst hand dealt to a teenager, played it flawlessly, and walked away with everything. Respect. King. My parents stole my $40,000 college fund for my brother's fake AI startup. So I ghosted them, hacked his investors, and let the SEC do the rest. My parents staged a tearful dinner to tell me my college fund was wiped out by the stock market, only for me to catch them laughing days later about giving it all to my golden child brother. So, I completely erased my existence from their lives, built my own tech empire in secret, and waited for my brother to illegally use my name on a $1.5 million investor pitch to absolutely destroy him. I still remember the heavy, suffocating smell of baked ziti. That specific, garlicky aroma is permanently burned into my brain like a digital watermark, marking the exact timestamp when my entire reality shattered. We were sitting around our scratched mahogany dining table, me, my parents, and my older brother, Caleb. I was 18, buzzing with the adrenaline of just receiving my acceptance letter to Kingsford University. It was my dream school, boasting an engineering program that ranked in the top 10 nationally. It had the ivy-covered brick walls, the state-of-the-art labs, everything. I got in purely on merit, but even with the partial scholarships I secured, I desperately needed the college fund my parents had been promising me since I was a kid. They'd always told me not to worry. Focus on your grades, Leo, my dad would say, patting my shoulder. We've got the finances locked down, you just get the A's. So I did. I sacrificed parties, weekends, and normal teenage stuff to build a flawless transcript. But that night, my mom suddenly dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her porcelain plate. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy and wide, wearing an expression that looked painfully rehearsed. Leo, she whispered, her voice trembling, your father and I. We need to talk to you about your college fund. My stomach plummeted into my shoes. My parents sat across from me, their hands tightly clasped together on the table like hostages to their own deception. Then, Dad delivered the killing blow. We lost everything, buddy. The fund, it's gone. Completely wiped out. They spun a masterful narrative. Dad blamed a sudden downturn in the stock market, a series of bad luck investments, and a volatile portfolio that evaporated overnight. Mom actually dabbed the corners of her eyes with a cloth napkin, sniffing softly as if she were mourning a sudden death in the family. Caleb, meanwhile, sat in absolute silence. His eyes darted between me and our parents, chewing his food slowly like a spectator watching a tragic play unfold. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, the shock was too absolute. I just numbly nodded, whispered, okay, and excused myself from the table. But as the days dragged on, the math in my head refused to balance. If we were so broke, why was Dad still wearing his luxury chronograph watch that cost more than my first semester's tuition? Why was Caleb's Instagram suddenly flooded with pictures of him flexing brand new Apple hardware, standing in front of premium co-working spaces with captions like, grind never stops. Big things coming? The truth spilled out on a random Tuesday night. I was coming back late from my best friend Noah's house. I slipped through the back door quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. As I stepped into the dark hallway, I heard voices floating from the kitchen. They were laughing. I froze behind the drywall. I still can't believe you managed to convince him, Mom was saying, her voice light, giggly, and completely devoid of the tears she'd weaponized at dinner. He bought the whole thing. Dad chuckled, a deep, satisfied sound. Hook, line, and sinker. The kid didn't even push back. Then, Caleb's voice chimed in, practically vibrating with excitement. That means we're good to go, right? The 40 grand will easily cover the initial startup costs. I've already got the front-end developer lined up. 40 grand. My stomach violently twisted. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. They weren't broke. The market didn't crash. They hadn't lost my college fund. They gave it to Caleb. I backed out of the house, my hands shaking so violently I dropped my keys on the concrete steps. I didn't even bother picking them up. I just walked. I walked for 3 miles in the freezing night air before my brain could even begin to process the magnitude of the betrayal. How do you reconcile the fact that the people who raised you, who cheered at your science fairs, who promised to protect you, had coldly stolen your future to fund your brother's vanity project? They didn't just choose him, they robbed me, lied to my face, and laughed about it in the dark. But they severely underestimated who they were dealing with. For years, I had been running a quiet side hustle. I refurbished broken laptops, flipped custom-built PCs, and resold tech hardware online. When I turned 17, Noah's uncle, a corporate accountant, had helped me set up a shell LLC to legally protect my assets and open a high-yield online savings account. I never thought I'd actually need to use it to hide from my own blood. Sitting on a cold curb at 2 a.m., bathed in the pale glow of a street lamp, I made a vow. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to demand the money back. I was going to surgically extract myself from their reality. I was going to vanish digitally, financially, and physically. The extraction began the second I got back to my room. I logged into the joint custodial account I shared with my parents. It held my official allowance and summer job scraps. They never monitored it closely, but my real money was funneled into my Ghost LLC account. I immediately withdrew every single cent from the joint account, exactly $3,215.50, and transferred it into my encrypted offshore-style online bank. Next, I sterilized my physical space. I packed up my custom laptop, my backup NAS drives, my Raspberry Pi cluster, and even my mechanical keyboard. Anything that held a byte of data was going with me. I factory reset my phone, wiped my browsers, set up a virtual VoIP number routed through a VPN, and bought a burner Chromebook with cash from a guy on Craigslist. I played the dutiful, Depressed son for 4 more days. I washed the dishes. I thanked Dad when he patronizingly handed me a $20 bill for gas. But at night, I was a ghost in the machine. I applied for remote tech internships, online boot camps, and entry-level cybersecurity apprenticeships. Within 48 hours, I landed a remote shadow program with a boutique cybersecurity firm in Colorado. It paid monthly, required an NDA, and asked 0 questions about my physical location. By Sunday night, I had secured a month-to-month room rental above a quiet bookstore 2 towns over, paid entirely in advance. At 4:45 a.m. on Monday, I scheduled an Uber, grabbed my 2 duffel bags, and walked out the front door. I didn't leave a note, I didn't look back. Update 1. While I was busy building a new life from scratch, Caleb was busy playing Silicon Valley cosplay. I knew he was gearing up to launch his startup. He had been hyping it up in every family group chat which I was now locked out of and LinkedIn post. He called it Apex Logic, claiming it was an AI-powered financial modeling platform. This was genuinely hilarious to me because Caleb barely knew how to clear his browser cache, let alone train a machine learning model. 3 weeks after I ghosted my family, Apex Logic had its official launch party, flashy press releases, custom logos, a catered event downtown. I only found out because Noah, my one remaining tether to my old life, forwarded me the digital invitation. I opened the PDF and scrolled to the bottom. Tucked neatly into the special thanks and founding teams section was a name that made my blood run cold: Leo Cross, technical partner. They hadn't just stolen my money, they were using my name. Caleb knew he had 0 technical credibility, so he slapped my reputation, the kid who actually got into a top engineering school, onto his pitch deck to convince venture capitalists that he had legitimate tech backing. I stared at the screen for a solid hour. Then, a slow, dark smile crept across my face. They had tied my name to a fraudulent business, built with my stolen money, and they were too arrogant to realize they had just handed me the detonator to their entire operation. But I didn't sue. Lawsuits are loud, slow, and messy. I wanted a silent, catastrophic implosion. Over the next 2 months, I kept my head down. I coded for 12 hours a day. I built software for overseas clients, reverse-engineered malware for practice, and leveled up my skills aggressively. My mentor at the Colorado firm took notice and started funneling me high-paying consulting contracts. I operated strictly under an alias, LC, Ledger. While Caleb was begging local angel investors for a $75,000 seed round, I had already banked over $15,000 in clean, untraceable consulting fees. Then, the universe handed me a loaded gun. It was 2 a.m. I was debugging a complex Python script for a logistics client in Tokyo when my burner email pinged. It was the old Gmail account tied to my original resume, the one I hadn't touched since the night I left. The subject line read, "Pre-seed round. Apex Logic." I clicked it. It was a forwarded email thread between 2 senior analysts at Horizon Ventures, a massive VC firm known for backing explosive fintech startups. The most recent message read, "Leo Cross is listed as the primary technical architecture partner on their founding page. He has verifiable engineering credentials. We need direct confirmation of his equity and involvement before we wire the funds. Can someone loop him in?" They had CC'd my old email. They thought I was part of the pitch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could have replied as myself, screamed fraud, and blown the whole thing up right there. But I wanted them to suffer the anxiety of the unknown. I drafted a meticulously corporate reply from my new alias, L.C. Ledger, CCing the analysts, regarding the listing of Mr. Leo Cross as a technical partner. This information is entirely fabricated. No signed agreements, NDAs, or equity stakes were ever formalized with Apex Logic. Please demand legally binding documentation from their CEO before proceeding with any capital deployment. Mr. Cross has 0 involvement. I hit send and went to sleep. The next morning, Noah FaceTimed me, looking like he was about to explode with glee. "Dude, did you see the startup forums? Horizon Ventures completely pulled out of Apex Logic. Word leaked that Caleb falsified his technical team credentials. His credibility is tanking." I watched from the shadows as Caleb scrambled to save face, frantically pivoting his launch as a closed beta. Meanwhile, I decided to do a little passive reconnaissance. Apex Logic's website was a disaster. It was built with sloppy, unsecured APIs and unfiltered forms. I found the public GitHub repository his cheap developer had used. It was unencrypted. Worse, it was storing early user data in plaintext. I didn't hack anything. I just archived the public source code. I now held a digital bomb, but because my name was still vaguely associated with the site, I could be legally implicated if a data breach occurred. I hired a very real, very aggressive corporate lawyer using my new consulting money. We sent a certified cease and desist letter directly to Caleb's rented office. Remove all references to Leo Cross from your digital, promotional, and internal materials immediately. Failure to comply will result in federal legal escalation and public disclosure of gross misrepresentation. 24 hours later, my name was scrubbed from their website. No apology from Caleb, no text from my parents, just terrified silence. Update 2. Life on my end was thriving. I was pulling in 3 consistent enterprise clients. My monthly income had quadrupled. I moved out of the bookstore room and into a shared tech co-op space run by a brilliant, cynical guy named Julian. It had exposed brick, terrible espresso, and absolute freedom. I kept a spreadsheet on my desktop titled The Red Ledger. It tracked every dollar my parents stole, plus estimated interest. The current total sat at $42,500. But the revenge I was cooking? That was going to be priceless. 6 months after I left, Caleb's smug face popped up on my LinkedIn feed. It was a series of funding announcement. He was posing in front of a leased Porsche with a caption that made me want to vomit. Secured the bag, $1.5 million series A locked with Richard Sterling. Time to scale. Number Apex Logic number, CEO number grind. I froze. $1.5 million? How? After the Horizon Ventures disaster and the sketchy backend, how did he con someone else? I clicked through the slide deck. He proudly attached to the post. Buried on slide 14, slightly blurred, was a familiar phrase: initial technology infrastructure designed in partnership with Leo Cross, currently operating as an independent advisor. He doubled down. He didn't remove my name, he just legally massaged it to make it look like I was a supportive, silent consultant. I immediately screenshotted it, archived it, and added a new tab to the Red Ledger: fraudulent representation, round 2. Later that week, I received a cryptic LinkedIn message from a guy named Sam T, whose title was UI, UX intern at Apex Logic. Hey Leo, saw your name in the series at Deck, thought you bailed? Also, you didn't hear this from me, but the internal tech is a dumpster fire. Let me know if you want to talk. We met at a dimly lit coffee shop near the financial district. Sam looked like he hadn't slept in a month. He ordered a black cold brew and immediately started spilling. I joined for the experience, Sam muttered, looking over his shoulder. Caleb promised we were building next-gen AI. Leo. It's a spreadsheet. The AI model is literally just an Excel macro with a slick user interface. We are charging enterprise clients to use a glorified calculator. And the data? It's completely unencrypted. I've warned him 5 times. Sam explained that Richard Sterling, the angel investor, was infamous for throwing money at buzzwords without doing proper due diligence. Caleb had sold him on machine learning and predictive blockchain, none of which existed. He used your name to close the deal, Sam said, sliding a sleek black thumb drive across the table. He told Sterling that you built the foundational code. I figured you'd want the internal logs. I walked back to my co-op with the holy grail of corporate espionage in my pocket. But before I could even plug the drive in, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Hi sweetie. It's been so long. Caleb just secured massive funding. We are incredibly proud of him. Please call us. We want to celebrate as a family. Even now, after stealing my future, she only reached out to brag about the son who benefited from the theft. I didn't reply. I just opened my laptop. The thumb drive was a goldmine. Unfiltered emails, back-end screenshots, proof of fabricated financial projections, and blatant terms of service violations. But the cherry on top came from Noah a few days later. He sent me a screen recording of a private TikTok video Caleb had shared with his inner circle. In the video, Caleb was sitting in his leased office, sipping whiskey, laughing with 2 developers. Bro, you should have seen Leo's face when mom told him the stock market ate his college fund. Caleb laughed, wiping a tear from his eye. Kid looked like someone shot his dog. One of the developers chimed in, didn't you use that exact money to pay the AWS hosting fees? Caleb smirked. College fund, startup fund, same thing, right? The kid's a nerd, he'll get a scholarship. The rage that washed over me was cold, calculating, and absolute. I wasn't just going to ruin his business anymore, I was going to salt the earth. The next day, Julian, the co-op owner, tapped on my desk. Hey, LC. A massive financial firm just contacted us. They want to build an ethical, highly secure data modeling tool. They specifically said they saw the rumors about Apex Logic being a scam, and they want the exact opposite. You want the contract? I smiled. Tell them I start Monday. That night, I received an automated alert from a legal scraping bot I had set up. It was a state incorporation filing for Apex Logic, dated 3 days ago. Under the section titled Founding Officers, it listed Joshua, Caleb Cross, CEO. Leo Cross, CTO. He actually forged my name on state-level corporate filings to satisfy Richard Sterling's final due diligence requirements. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore. This was a federal crime. I didn't hesitate. I called Maya Vance, a notoriously ruthless tech investigative journalist for Silicon Wire. I had been quietly feeding her anonymous tips for weeks, but this time, I went on the record. Maya, I said into the phone. I have the internal logs, the fake AI source code, the forged state incorporation documents, and a video of the CEO admitting to stealing his initial seed money from his brother. Do you want the exclusive? She breathed heavily into the receiver. Send it all. Give me 48 hours. 2 days later, the article dropped like a tactical nuke. Headline: The Phantom CTO, How Apex Logic Fabricated Its Tech, Forged State Documents, and Conned Investors Out of $1.5 million. The article was a masterpiece. Maya included screenshots of the plaintext user data, quotes from Sam the intern, the forged incorporation documents, and a transcript of the TikTok video. She completely dismantled Caleb's AI claims, exposing it as a basic spreadsheet macro. Within 3 hours, Richard Sterling's legal team issued a public statement severing all ties with Apex Logic, announcing an immediate lawsuit for investor fraud and breach of contract. By noon, Apex Logic's website was offline. By 5 p.m., Caleb's LinkedIn profile was deleted. His empire didn't just crumble, it was vaporized. The fallout was spectacular. Tech Twitter was flooded with memes of Caleb's face. The SEC reportedly opened a preliminary inquiry into the forged state documents. I sat in my favorite chair at the co-op, sipping a painfully bitter espresso, watching the digital carnage unfold on my monitor. The red ledger was finally closed. Final balance, $44,120.75, paid in full via absolute destruction. That evening, I heard a frantic, heavy knocking at the door of my new apartment. I checked the security camera feed. It was my parents. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. My mother looked 10 years older. Her makeup was smudged, her hair a mess, and her eyes were frantic. My dad stood behind her, staring at his shoes, looking like a deflated balloon. Leo, please, Mom choked out, her voice cracking. Let us in. We need to talk to you. Caleb is in serious legal trouble. They're talking about fraud charges. You have to tell the press it was a misunderstanding. Please, you're his brother. I stared at her through the crack in the door, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. A misunderstanding? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He forged my signature on state documents. He built a fraudulent company using $40,000 you stole from me. And you laughed about it. I heard you in the kitchen, Mom. Hook, line, and sinker. Remember? All the color drained from her face. She gasped, taking a physical step back as if I had struck her. Dad finally looked up, his face pale. Leo. We didn't know how to tell you. We thought he would succeed and pay you back tenfold. We thought you'd eventually forgive us. Leo. You didn't think about me at all, I replied coldly. You placed a bet on your favorite son using my chips, and he lost. Now you have to pay the house. He's going to lose everything, Mom wailed, gripping the doorframe. Please, Leo, don't do this to your family. I don't have a family, I said. I have a biological origin point that I have successfully severed ties with. Do not ever come to my home again, or I will have you arrested for trespassing. I shut the door in their faces and locked the deadbolt. I listened to my mother sob in the hallway for 5 minutes before my dad gently guided her away. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and went back to work. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at the National Tech Ethics and Transparency Summit in Chicago. I stood on a brightly lit stage in front of 500 industry professionals. I didn't wear a suit, just a plain black t-shirt and jeans. I spoke about data security, the dangers of hyperinflated startup culture, and the critical importance of digital autonomy. I didn't mention Caleb by name, but everyone in the room knew exactly who I was. When I walked off the stage, the applause was deafening. When I returned to my hotel room that night, the front desk handed me a crumpled envelope that had been dropped off earlier. No return address. Inside was a hastily scribbled note on cheap paper. Leo. I lost the car. Sterling is suing me for everything. Mom and Dad had to remortgage the house to pay for my defense lawyers. I know I screwed up, but I'm still your brother. Maybe when the dust settles, we can build something real together. Caleb. I read the note twice. I didn't feel a shred of pity. He still didn't understand. He wasn't sorry for what he did, he was only sorry he got caught. I struck a match, lit the corner of the paper, and dropped it into the metal wastebasket, watching his desperate plea turn into meaningless gray ash. The next morning, I officially launched my own software product, the secure, ethical data modeling tool I had built with Julian. It had no fake AI buzzwords, no bloated promises, and no stolen capital. It was just clean, brilliant code. Within the first month, we crossed 20,000 active enterprise users. I didn't need to flaunt leased sports cars or post toxic hustle culture quotes on social media. I had something Caleb never had, and something my parents could never steal again: absolute, untouchable independence. Sometimes, when I'm driving through my old hometown to visit Noah, I pass by the neighborhood where I grew up. The house looks smaller now. The curtains are permanently drawn, the lawn is slightly overgrown, and there are no luxury cars in the driveway. It looks exactly like what it is, a monument to a bad investment. I never stop. I just keep driving, accelerating toward a future that is entirely, unequivocally mine. Top comments. User 1. This is the most satisfying execution of corporate and personal karma I have ever read. The fact that they literally laughed about stealing your future, only for you to systematically dismantle his entire fraudulent empire using nothing but the truth and a Wi-Fi connection, is absolute poetry. Your parents remortgaging their house to pay for his defense lawyers is the exact ending they deserved for betting on the wrong horse. Enjoy your success, man, you earned every single penny. User 2. As a software engineer, the part that made me physically cringe was him using an Excel macro and calling it AI. That alone deserves jail time, let alone forging state incorporation documents with your name. You played this flawlessly. By waiting for him to secure the Series A funding and file official government paperwork, you let him elevate the crime from a civil dispute to federal fraud. Utterly brilliant. User 3. I have a biological origin point that I have successfully severed ties with. Is greater than. Put this on a t-shirt immediately. The absolute audacity of your mother to show up at your door, not to apologize for stealing $40,000 from you, but to beg you to save the golden child from the consequences of his own illegal actions. You are a legend for shutting that door. Never look back. My mom literally pulled me aside at a family dinner and told me I was too successful, and that my life was making my unemployed, golden child brother feel bad about himself. When I refused to pretend I was a failure just to protect his fragile ego, she retaliated by calling my company's HR department with a 3-page list of fabricated lies to get me fired. Spoiler alert, it completely backfired, and it ended up costing her everything. Hey Reddit, I'm a 29-year-old guy working as a senior data analyst for a mid-sized tech logistics company in Seattle. There is absolutely nothing crazy fancy about my background. I didn't have a trust fund, I didn't have connections, and I certainly didn't have a safety net. I worked my way up from being a completely broke junior analyst, straight out of college. My younger brother, Leo, who is 26, well, he exists. That's about the most impressive thing I can possibly say about him without outright lying. To understand the absolute insanity of what my mother did to me, you have to let me paint you a picture of how things have always been in my family. I am the oldest kid. From day one, I was expected to be responsible, mature, and basically raise myself while my parents focused every single ounce of their energy, time, and finances on Leo. He was the golden child, the baby, the one who could do absolutely no wrong, even when he was actively, maliciously doing wrong. When we were kids, the double standards were suffocating. I would get screamed at and grounded for a week for leaving a single pair of shoes in the hallway. Leo would literally trash the entire living room, break expensive vases, draw on the walls, and my parents would just smile, take a picture, and say he was expressing his boundless creativity. I was given a strict chore chart starting at age 7. I was doing my own laundry, mowing the lawn, and washing dishes. Leo didn't even know how to operate a washing machine until he was 18, and even then, my mom still did it for him. Birthdays were an absolute joke. For my 16th birthday, I got a used graphing calculator for school and a pack of generic brand socks. I remember opening it and trying to force a smile while my parents told me it was practical. When Leo turned 14, 2 years later, he woke up to a brand new, $2,500 dirt bike with a giant red bow on it, followed by a massive party where my parents rented a bouncy castle and catered barbecue for 40 of his friends. But you know what? Very early on, I learned to completely stop caring about the unfairness. I realized that getting angry was a waste of energy. I just put my head down, built a wall around my emotions, and focused entirely on what I could control, my future. I studied relentlessly, I got straight A's. I worked part-time jobs at a local grocery store starting the exact day I turned 16, and I saved absolutely every single penny in a bank account my parents couldn't access. My parents never helped me financially after I turned 18, not one dime. Not with college, not with my first apartment, nothing. I went to a solid, in-state public university on a partial academic scholarship that I earned entirely by myself. I worked 30 hours a week as a barista, pulling opening shifts at 4:30 a.m. before my 9 a.m. classes. I lived on bulk rice, frozen vegetables, and sheer willpower. I graduated in exactly 4 years with a degree in data analytics and a 3.8 gigapascals. Meanwhile, Leo's college experience was a fully funded vacation. My parents paid for him to go to an expensive, out-of-state private college. They bought him a brand new Honda Civic as a going-away present. They covered his tuition, his off-campus luxury apartment rent, and gave him a monthly allowance so he wouldn't have to stress about working. He changed his major 5 different times from business, to philosophy, to art history, and finally settling on communications. It took him 6.5 years to graduate. He finished with a dismal 2.1 gigapascals. His graduation party had over 100 people, a live band, and an open bar. My graduation celebration was a quick lunch at a local diner where my dad literally made me pay for my own milkshake. After college, I started at my current company as a junior analyst making $48,000 a year. I lived in a crappy, 400 square foot studio apartment above a noisy laundromat where the washing machines literally shook my bed at night. I drove a beat-up Toyota Corolla with a missing hubcap, ate ramen most nights, and saved aggressively. Leo, on the other hand, bounced around between random retail and entry-level marketing jobs, quitting half of them because the managers didn't respect his creative vision. He still lived at home rent-free, driving the car my parents bought him, while they paid his phone bill and car insurance. I worked my absolute tail off. I was the first one in the office, and the last one to leave. I took on extra projects, taught myself advanced Python coding on the weekends, and optimized supply chain algorithms that saved my company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I got promoted after 2 years to analyst, and then 3 years after that to senior analyst. My salary jumped to $85,000. I finally moved out of that terrible studio into a beautiful, modern 2-bedroom apartment in a nice complex with a gym and a pool. I bought myself a 3-year-old Hyundai Sonata that actually had working air conditioning and Bluetooth. I started building up a massive savings account, nothing extravagant, but I was finally living like a normal, successful adult instead of a desperately broke college kid. Leo was still at home at age 26, working 12 hours a week at a boutique sneaker store, making maybe $18,000 a year. My parents didn't care. They weren't charging him a cent of rent. They were basically completely supporting a grown man who had zero ambition, no drive, and spent 90% of his waking hours playing competitive video games and hanging out with his equally unmotivated buddies on Discord. Last year, I achieved my biggest milestone yet. I bought my first house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman-style place in a quiet, decent suburb about 25 minutes from my office. It needed a little bit of cosmetic updating, but the bones were incredibly solid. I saved up the $80,000 down payment entirely by myself. I got pre-approved for the mortgage, negotiated the closing costs, and handled the entire grueling process completely solo. It was huge for me. It was the first major adult milestone I had achieved completely on my own, without a single shred of help from anyone. When I called my parents to tell them I had officially closed on the house and had the keys in my hand, their response was lukewarm at best. My mom sighed into the phone and said, "That's nice, honey." She said it with the exact same tone you'd use if I told her I bought a new brand of paper towels. My dad immediately chimed in and asked, in this incredibly condescending tone, "Are you absolutely sure you aren't in over your head? Mortgages are for adults. Zero congratulations, zero excitement, zero pride in what their eldest son had accomplished through blood, sweat, and tears. But you know what really stung? What really twisted the knife? 2 days after I told them about buying my house, Leo casually mentioned at breakfast that he was thinking about maybe looking at apartments eventually, someday in the future. My parents absolutely fell all over themselves. They offered to pay his first and last month's rent. They offered to co-sign the lease. They talked endlessly about how exciting it would be for him to finally have his own bachelor pad and how they would take him furniture shopping. He hadn't even looked at a single Zillow listing. He was literally just daydreaming out loud, and they were ready to finance his entire existence. The absolute tipping point came 3 months ago at one of our mandatory family dinners. We do these once a month at my parents' house. They are usually excruciatingly boring. We eat whatever dried chicken my mom made, make shallow small talk about the weather, and I always leave the exact second it becomes socially acceptable to do so. This particular dinner, my Uncle Marcus was there with my Aunt Helen. Uncle Marcus is my dad's brother, but unlike my dad, he's actually a grounded, rational human being. During dinner, Uncle Marcus turned to me and asked how work was going. I smiled and mentioned that I had just gotten another raise and a title bump, and was now making $105,000 a year. I wasn't bragging. I didn't bring it up out of nowhere. I was just answering his direct question honestly. My uncle was genuinely impressed. He asked more questions about my job, what my day-to-day looked like, and what the tech industry was like right now. It was completely normal, healthy conversation. I talked about a massive data migration project I had just successfully led that saved the company a huge amount in server costs. I mentioned how I had been getting amazing feedback from the VP of operations, and how I was being heavily considered for a data manager position that was opening up next year. Leo sat there the entire time looking like someone had just run over his dog. His face was bright red. He got quieter and quieter, violently stabbing his dried chicken with his fork, barely eating a bite, and aggressively scrolling on his phone under the table. My parents noticed immediately. They kept shooting me these toxic, warning glares across the table, acting as if I was committing a federal crime by having a completely normal conversation about my career with my own uncle. After dinner, Uncle Marcus and Aunt Helen left. I was standing in the dining room, quietly gathering the plates to help clear the table, when my mom marched over and grabbed my arm. She had this deadly serious, furious expression that immediately put my guard up. "Can I talk to you in the living room for a minute?" she demanded. My dad and Leo stayed in the kitchen, purposely looking away. Sure, what's up? I asked, genuinely confused about what I could have possibly done wrong. My mom sat down on the sofa, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me like I was a massive disappointment. I need you to understand something. The way you talked about your job tonight. It made Leo feel really, really bad about himself. I stared at her for 3 solid seconds before I actually let out a laugh, because I legitimately thought she was making a dark joke, but she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were ice cold. Wait, you're serious right now? I asked, dropping the plates back onto the table. Yes, I am completely serious, she hissed. Leo is going through a very hard time right now trying to figure out his career path and his purpose in life. He does not need to sit here and listen to you boast about how successful you are. It just makes him feel infinitely worse about where he is in life. It's incredibly toxic of you. I felt my blood pressure spike. Mom, he asked me to pass the salt. Uncle Marcus asked me about work. I was literally just answering his question. I didn't bring it up. Mom, you could have been significantly more modest about it, she snapped. You didn't need to go into so much exhaustive detail about your salary, your raise, and your promotion prospects. You know perfectly well that Leo is struggling. Leo is struggling because he works 12 hours a week at a sneaker store and lives in your house for free at 26 years old. I said, my voice dropping an octave as I tried to keep my temper in check. He games until 4 a.m. every night. That is not my fault, and I am not responsible for his choices. That is exactly the kind of arrogant attitude I'm talking about, my mom said, her voice getting shrill and hysterical. You need to be vastly more sensitive to your brother's emotional state. Not everyone is as ruthlessly career-driven as you are. Some people have creative souls and need more time to find their path. He's 26, Mom. He has had nearly a decade to find his path. And I am absolutely not going to apologize for working hard, sacrificing my 20s, and being successful. She let out this massive, theatrical sigh, acting like I was a rebellious teenager. I am just asking you to tone it down. When we have family gatherings, hide it. Be less visible. You do not need to constantly remind everyone how well you're doing. It creates immense tension in this house. Creates tension? Me answering questions truthfully creates tension? I asked, my voice finally rising. You are making your brother feel inadequate, she said flatly, crossing her arms. I am asking you, as his mother, to be more considerate. Hide your accomplishments. Is that really so much to ask to keep the peace in this family? I stood there, completely paralyzed, processing what my own mother was actually saying to my face. She was demanding that I actively hide my success, pretend I was doing poorly, and shrink myself down just to protect my adult brother's incredibly fragile ego. She didn't want to encourage him to do better. She didn't want to push him to get his life together. She just wanted to guarantee that I didn't remind him that he was going absolutely nowhere by being visibly successful myself. So, what exactly do you want me to do? I asked, my tone dripping with venom. Lie about my job? Pretend I work the night shift at a gas station? Should I quit and work part-time retail with Leo so he doesn't feel threatened? Stop being so incredibly dramatic. My mom snapped, standing up to meet my gaze. I am just asking for some discretion, some humility. You don't need to constantly rub your money in our faces. Lest, Asti. I mentioned it once. Because Uncle Marcus directly asked me. That is not rubbing it in anyone's face. Well, it was highly uncomfortable for Leo, and I expect you to be far more thoughtful going forward, or you won't be welcome at these dinners. I grabbed my jacket off the chair. I'm going to head out. My dad finally shuffled out from the kitchen. You're leaving already? We haven't even had the pie yet. Yeah, I think I'm completely done here, I said, shoving my arms into my jacket. Mom just informed me that I'm too successful and my existence hurts Leo's feelings. So, I should probably go hide in a cave from now on. Real supportive family dynamic we have going on here. My dad's face did this pathetic, cowardly twitch. I could tell instantly that he knew exactly what my mom had said, that they had likely planned this confrontation together, but he didn't have the spine to admit it out loud. Your mother is just trying to keep the peace, son. By asking me to pretend I'm a failure? That's your version of keeping the peace? Nobody is asking you to pretend anything. My dad lied, refusing to make eye contact. We just think it would be vastly better for everyone's mental health if you were a little less vocal about your career trajectory. Right, got it. Message received loud and clear. I headed for the front door. As I walked past the kitchen, Leo was leaning against the counter, looking smug as hell. He had a literal smirk on his face. He knew exactly what had just gone down in the living room, and he was eating it up. He loved seeing me get scolded for doing better than him. See you later, loser, I said directly to Leo, and slammed the front door behind me. I sat in my car in their driveway for a full 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, processing how deeply messed up that entire interaction was. My parents weren't proud of me. They didn't love my success. They saw my hard work as a toxic problem that needed to be eradicated. So, I did exactly what I do best. I channeled all of that rage into my work. The very next week, I volunteered to lead 3 more high-profile data pipeline projects at the company. I stayed late every single night. I came in on Saturdays. I built interactive dashboards for the executive team that completely revolutionized how they tracked quarterly logistics. I started networking aggressively, positioning myself undeniably for that management role. At the next monthly family dinner, I didn't hold back. When my dad asked how the weather was, I pivoted the conversation and talked loudly and proudly about every single massive project I was leading at work. My mom's face got tighter and tighter with every word, her lips pursed so hard they turned white. Leo literally threw his napkin on his plate and excused himself halfway through the meal, stomping up the stairs to his room like a toddler. My dad tried to change the subject 3 separate times, and I just kept bringing it back to my career. 2 weeks after that dinner, my hard work paid off in a massive way. I was officially called into the VP's office and offered the promotion. My new title was Data Analytics Manager, and my salary made a staggering jump to $125,000 a year, plus performance bonuses. I was absolutely over the moon. This was everything I had sacrificed my 20s for. I called my parents to tell them. I knew they wouldn't care, but I wanted to force them to hear it. My mom answered the phone. "Hey mom, I got some massive news today. I officially got promoted to manager. Huge raise, too. I'm running my own team now." There was a deafening, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "Mom? That's good, honey," she finally forced out, her voice dripping with ice. "Is Dad there?" I wanted to tell him, too. "He's busy in the garage right now. I'll let him know eventually." "Okay, well, yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's a massive step up for my career." More dead silence. "All right, well, I have a celebration dinner to get to, just wanted to share the news." "Okay, bye." She hung up the phone before I could even say goodbye back. That was my own mother's reaction to the biggest, most life-changing career achievement of my life. "That's good, honey," followed by hanging up on me. Whatever. I didn't need their validation. I never had, and I wasn't going to start needing it now. To celebrate my promotion, I decided to finally treat myself. I traded in my Hyundai and leased a brand new, stunningly sleek BMW 3 Series. It was gorgeous, fast, and a symbol of everything I had built for myself. The following month at the family dinner, I made sure to park the BMW right in the center of their driveway. Leo was outside taking out the trash when I pulled up. The look of pure, unfiltered jealousy and hatred on his face when he saw the BMW badge was absolutely priceless. He dropped the trash bag on the lawn and stormed inside without saying a word to me. Dinner that night was a war zone of silence. Nobody asked me about work. Nobody asked about the brand new luxury car sitting in the driveway. Uncle Marcus wasn't there to break the ice, so we just sat in agonizing quiet. After dinner, I was putting my jacket on to leave when my mom aggressively followed me outside, right up to the driver's side door of my BMW. "We need to talk," she demanded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face red with fury. "About what?" I asked, unlocking the car so the headlights flashed brightly in her face. "This needs to stop immediately," she said, gesturing wildly at my car and, apparently, my entire existence. "You are purposely rubbing your success in Leo's face. It is cruel and malicious." "I drove a car to a dinner, Mom. How is that rubbing it in his face? You knew he would see it. You knew it would make him feel pathetic. You could have parked down the street, or you could have taken an Uber. You didn't need to parade this monstrosity in our driveway." I actually laughed out loud, a deep, genuine belly laugh. "You want me to park down the street so my brother doesn't feel bad about his own life choices? Are you actually hearing the words coming out of your mouth right now?" "I am hearing a son who has become incredibly arrogant, narcissistic, and inconsiderate," she screamed back at me. "You are not the sweet boy I raised." "The boy you raised? Mom, you barely raised me. You were vastly too busy making sure Leo had a dirt bike and catered parties while I was buying my own socks and working at a grocery store at 16. I scraped by on my own. I worked for every single thing I have. Every dollar, every promotion, this house, this car. And now that I am finally doing incredibly well, you want me to hide in the shadows because Leo can't handle the fact that he has accomplished absolutely nothing in 26 years? Her face went from red to a dangerous shade of purple. "How dare you speak to your mother that way? I'm speaking the truth. Leo is going absolutely nowhere because you and Dad have enabled his pathetic behavior his entire life. He has no ambition, no work ethic, and no drive because you have handed him everything on a silver platter and expected nothing in return. That is your fault, not mine. Leo is going through a very delicate transition period," she yelled, her voice shaking with rage. "He is trying to figure things out. The absolute last thing he needs is his arrogant brother flaunting his wealth every single chance he gets to destroy his confidence." "I'm not flaunting anything, Mom, I am literally just living my life. If my normal life makes Leo that uncomfortable, he should probably get off his gaming chair and do something about his own life instead of expecting the world to cater to his mediocrity." "You have changed," she said quietly, Her eyes filled with genuine disgust. You used to be humble. I used to be invisible, I corrected her, staring right into her eyes. There is a massive difference. I got in my BMW, started the engine so it roared to life, and backed out of the driveway, leaving her standing there in the exhaust. I thought that was the end of it. I figured we would just have a Cold War for a few months. I vastly underestimated how insane and vindictive my mother truly was. 2 days later, on a random Tuesday morning, I got called into my boss's office before I had even poured my first cup of coffee. His name is David, the VP of Operations. He is usually a very laid-back, professional guy, but when I walked into his office, he looked incredibly uncomfortable and tense. "Close the door and take a seat," David said, not looking up from his laptop. I sat down, my heart starting to race a little. This did not feel like a normal project check-in. David leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and sighed deeply. "I received a very, very strange phone call yesterday afternoon." "Okay?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "It was from a woman claiming to be your mother." The blood instantly drained from my face. The room started to spin slightly. "What?" She called the main corporate line, demanded to speak to upper management, and got transferred around until she finally reached my desk. "She said she was your mother, and she had some very severe, urgent concerns she needed to discuss about your behavior at this company." I literally could not believe the words entering my ears. "David, what kind of concerns?" David looked at me with a mix of pity and confusion. "She claimed that you have been bragging to your family members about stealing credit for other people's work. She said you have been lying about your technical skills, fabricating your data reports, and that we, as a company, should know that you are not actually responsible for the success you've been claiming." I felt like I had been violently punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe for a second. "David, that is completely, 100% false. Every single thing I've worked on is documented in our Git repositories. Every project, every dashboard, every line of code, you know that. You've personally reviewed my work." "I know," David said quickly, holding up a hand. "That's exactly why this was such a bizarre and alarming call." But she didn't stop there. She also claimed that you have been verbally harassing your junior coworkers, creating a highly toxic and hostile work environment, and threatening people who try to expose you. My jaw practically hit the floor. "Harassing coworkers? Are you kidding me? We haven't had a single complaint. My team literally just bought me a cake last week for my promotion." "I know," David repeated. "Obviously, I know it's not true. If anything, your team's peer reviews were the highest in the entire department. But I need you to understand the severity of this. Your mother called your workplace to accuse you of corporate fraud and workplace harassment." "I am so incredibly sorry, David," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of utter humiliation and blinding rage. "I can't believe she did this. Why would she do this?" David shrugged helplessly. "I was hoping you could tell me." She sounded incredibly convincing. She said she was deeply concerned that our company was being deceived by a sociopath. "Look," I told her point blank that we had absolutely no concerns regarding your stellar performance, and that all our employees' work is rigorously documented. She did not seem satisfied with that answer. She got very aggressive and implied she might escalate this to human resources or the executive board. "I wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries to contact our HR department." "I will handle this immediately," I said, standing up, my hands balled into fists. "This is completely out of line. It will never happen again. Do you need to take the rest of the day off to deal with this family situation?" David asked gently. "No," I said, my voice ice cold. "I have a pipeline deployment at 11 a.m. I'm fine." "For what it's worth," David said as I opened the door, "you are one of the strongest, most brilliant performers we have ever had. Whatever insane family drama is happening outside these walls, it doesn't reflect on your work here. We know who you are." I thanked him and walked back to my desk, completely numb. I stared at my monitors for an hour, not seeing a single line of code. My own mother had actually called my workplace. She had tried to destroy my career, my livelihood, and my reputation, all to get me fired. Why? So I would be unemployed and miserable, just like Leo, and he wouldn't have to feel bad about himself anymore. This wasn't just asking me to tone down my success. This was active, malicious, calculated sabotage. I grabbed my phone, walked out of the building, and marched into the empty parking garage. I called her. She answered on the second ring, sounding completely normal. "Hi, honey. Did you call my boss?" I cut her off, my voice a low, dangerous growl. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. "Answer me right now. Did you call my vice president and tell him I was committing fraud and harassing my team?" I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice wavered pathetically. "Do not lie to me," I screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the garage. "My boss just pulled me into his office and told me every single insane, psychotic lie you fed him, about how I steal credit, about how I harass people. You actively tried to get me fired." "I didn't try to get you fired. She yelled back, instantly going on the defensive. I just thought your management team needed to know the absolute truth about how you really act behind closed doors. The truth? What truth? That I work 60 hours a week and do my job flawlessly? That is the only truth. Everything I have accomplished is real and heavily documented. You tried to sabotage my entire life with fabricated, malicious lies. You have been absolutely insufferable lately. She screeched into the phone, constantly bragging, showing off that disgusting luxury car, purposefully making Leo feel suicidal and terrible about his life. Someone needed to knock you off your high horse and teach you a lesson in humility. So, you tried to destroy my career? That was your brilliant solution? Call my employer with made-up accusations that could have ruined my life? They weren't made up. You have been taking credit for things you didn't do, I know it. Stop lying, I roared. You don't know a single damn thing about my work. You don't even know what data analytics means. You just decided that because your precious, golden child Leo is a pathetic loser whose life is going nowhere, mine shouldn't go anywhere either. That is wildly unfair. She sobbed, trying to play the victim. I am your mother. I carried you. I was just trying to teach you some desperately needed humility. By trying to destroy my livelihood? That's not teaching humility, Mom. That is psychotic sabotage. You know what? We are completely done. Do not ever call me again. Do not ever contact my workplace again. Do not show up at my house. You are dead to me. We are done. You cannot speak to me that way. I am your mother. I demand respect. And you're supposed to be proud of your son when he succeeds, not try to tear him down because it hurts your favorite pet's feelings. Lose my number. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I had never spoken to my parents like that in my entire life. I had never stood up to them so aggressively. But a line had been crossed that could never, ever be uncrossed. My phone immediately started ringing. My mom. I declined it. Then my dad. Declined. Then my mom again. Declined. Then the text messages started flooding in. Mom, you are being incredibly dramatic and ridiculous. Call me back right this second so we can discuss this like rational adults. Dad, your mother is hyperventilating and crying uncontrollably on the kitchen floor. This is absolutely no way to treat the woman who gave you life. Call and apologize immediately. Leo, dude, what the hell did you say to Mom? She's a wreck. You're such a selfish prick. Stop acting like you're better than us. I blocked all 3 of their numbers. Without hesitation, just blocked, blocked, blocked. The rest of that week was a tense blur. I kept expecting my mom to physically show up at my office lobby and make a scene, or call David again, but nothing happened. I stayed hyper-focused on work, deploying my projects flawlessly, and tried to push the insane betrayal out of my mind. Friday afternoon, Uncle Marcus called me. We had exchanged numbers a few months back when he wanted some advice on upgrading his home network. Hey, kid, got a minute? He asked, his tone very serious. Yeah, what's up? I heard about what happened with your mom calling your VP. Your dad called me last night crying about it, trying to get me to intervene. Oh, fantastic. So the whole family knows now. Just me and Helen, Marcus said. And for what it's worth, I told your dad that what your mom did was completely, unforgivably out of line. Like, psycho ward level over the line. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Thank you. I'm so glad someone in this family isn't completely insane. I tried talking sense into them, Marcus continued, sighing. I told them they were being absolutely ridiculous about this whole bizarre dynamic with you and Leo. Your mom just kept screaming that you had become an arrogant monster and needed to be brought down to reality. Your dad backed her up completely. It was honestly disturbing to listen to. That has been my entire life for the past 29 years, Uncle Marcus, I said exhaustedly. Well, I wanted you to know that Helen and I do not see it that way. We think you have done an incredible, amazing job building your life from scratch. We are incredibly proud of you, even if your parents are too blinded by their obsession with Leo to see it. I felt a massive lump form in my throat. I really appreciate that, Marcus, more than you know. And between you and me, Marcus said, lowering his voice, Leo needs a massive reality check. The kid is 26 years old, living at home, with no real job, no ambition, and no skills. Your parents aren't doing him any favors by coddling his laziness. They are ruining him. Try telling them that, I scoffed. I have, multiple times. They absolutely refuse to hear it. They have deeply convinced themselves that Leo is a misunderstood genius who is going to figure things out any day now and become a millionaire, and that you are just temporarily ahead of him. It's clinical delusion. We talked for a few more minutes, and hanging up, I felt marginally better. At least I wasn't the crazy one, but my relief was incredibly short-lived. Monday morning, I walked into work feeling refreshed. But before I even made it to my desk, David intercepted me in the hallway. His face was grim. We need to go to HR. Right now, he said quietly. That same horrible stomach drop sensation hit me, tenfold. Did she call again? I asked as we walked quickly toward the elevators. Worse. Our director of human resources, Sarah, received a massive email from her on Friday night, right after business hours. You have got to be absolutely kidding me. I deeply wish I was, David said, pressing the elevator button. HR forwarded it to me over the weekend. It is a 3-page, single-spaced document detailing severe, supposedly documented accusations about your behavior. She claims you are a corporate fraud who has been actively manipulating management, stealing code from junior developers, and she even named specific projects you've worked on. How does she know my projects? She must have stalked your LinkedIn profile and weaponized the descriptions you posted, David said. It is honestly one of the most unhinged things I have seen in my 20 years in corporate management, but because it was submitted formally in writing to HR, it triggered an automatic, mandatory investigation. I spent my entire weekend pulling your Git logs, your Jira tickets, compiling all the positive feedback from your team, and documenting every single line of code you've written for the past year to prove she's lying. David, I am so incredibly sorry. This is a nightmare. It's not your fault, but we have to play the corporate game now to protect you. We walked into Sarah's office. Sarah, the HR director, was a very sharp, no-nonsense woman. She motioned for me to sit down. She had a thick manila folder on her desk. Let's get right to it, Sarah said, folding her hands. I am fully aware of the family dynamic at play here, as David briefed me. However, I need to formally ask you, is there any truth, even a fraction of a percent, to the claims made in this email by your mother? Absolutely none, I said firmly, looking her dead in the eye. Every single accusation is a complete and utter fabrication designed maliciously to ruin my career. Sarah nodded slowly. She opened the folder and slid a printed copy of the email across the desk. I read it, and my blood ran ice cold. It was worse than David described. My mother had written an elaborate, corporate-sounding hit piece. She claimed I had manipulated the Q3 logistics overhaul project by stealing the architecture from a junior analyst who was too afraid to speak up. She claimed I was verbally abusive in meetings. She claimed I had a severe drinking problem that affected my work. It was so detailed, so vicious, and so calculated that I felt physically nauseous reading it. This is insane, I whispered. She doesn't even know what Q3 logistics means. We know, Sarah said gently. David spent the weekend providing me with undeniable, time-stamped proof that you were the sole architect of that project. We also discreetly interviewed 3 of your direct reports this morning before you arrived. They had nothing but glowing, exceptional praise for your leadership and character. They explicitly denied any harassment or toxic behavior. So, what happens now? I asked, feeling completely drained. You are fully cleared. The investigation is officially closed as baseless, Sarah said, closing the folder. However, I am having our legal department draft a formal cease and desist letter. It will be sent via certified mail to your mother today. It will explicitly state that her claims have been investigated and proven false, and that any further contact with this company, its employees, or its clients will result in immediate legal action for defamation and harassment. I let out a massive sigh of relief, sinking into the chair. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, David. I am so sorry you had to waste company time on my psychotic family. Family dynamics can be tragic, Sarah said sympathetically. You are an exceptional employee, don't let her break you. I left the HR office feeling validated, but completely hollowed out. My own mother had spent hours drafting a weaponized email to destroy me. That evening, as I was cooking dinner in my house, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. Hello? Is this going to be your permanent response to everything? Just ignoring your family and pretending we don't exist? It was my dad, calling from a burner phone or a friend's phone since I had blocked his cell. I am not pretending you don't exist, I said coldly. I am actively cutting contact with toxic people who tried to maliciously sabotage my career. Your mother made a small mistake. My dad pleaded, his voice desperate. She was highly emotional, she was upset about Leo's depression, and she just snapped. She didn't mean most of what she wrote. She wrote 3 pages of calculated, weaponized lies to my HR department. Dad, 3 pages. She looked up my LinkedIn, found my projects, and fabricated a story to get me fired for fraud. That is not emotional, that is a premeditated assassination of my character. She is incredibly apologetic now. Dad lied. She realizes she went too far. She's crying. Good for her. It still doesn't change a damn thing. You are really going to completely cut off your entire family over this? He yelled, his temper finally flaring. Over your mother trying to teach you a harsh lesson about humility? Trying to get me fired and sued for fraud isn't teaching humility, Dad, it's sabotage. And yes, I am absolutely cutting off the people who view my hard-earned success as a disease that needs to be cured. Leo is having a really hard time with all of this, Dad said, wildly changing tactics. He feels like you have completely abandoned the family. His depression is spiking. I actually laughed. Leo is having a hard time? Leo, who lives completely rent-free in your house at age 26, works 12 hours a week, and plays video games all night? That Leo? He is going through a very sensitive transition period. He has been going through a transition period for 8 years, Dad, I yelled back. At some point, it's not a transition. It's just his pathetic life, and that is not my problem. You used to care about this family. Dad said quietly, trying to guilt-trip me. I still care about the family members who are actually happy for my success instead of trying to destroy it. Which, at this point, is literally just Uncle Marcus. You are being incredibly selfish, cruel, and arrogant. I am being successful, and it makes you violently uncomfortable. Those are not the same thing. I hung up the phone and blocked that number, too. Update 1. The next few months were blissfully, wonderfully quiet. No insane calls from my parents, no psychotic emails to my HR department, no unexpected driveway ambushes. I threw myself entirely into my new manager role. I excelled at my job, got a massive performance bonus, and started actually enjoying my life without the constant, suffocating undercurrent of my family's toxic drama. I started dating a wonderful woman named Claire, who brought immense peace into my life. Then, Uncle Marcus called again with an update. Hey, kid. Just wanted to give you the latest scoop on the insane asylum, he said. Do I even want to hear this? I asked, pouring myself a glass of wine. Probably not, but you need to know what they're saying. Your mom has been going on a massive smear campaign. She's telling the entire extended family that you violently cut off the family for absolutely no reason. She's playing the ultimate victim. She says you became corrupted by corporate greed, rejected her loving guidance, and now you refuse to speak to her. Her loving guidance being trying to get me fired for corporate fraud. Oh, she is conveniently leaving that part completely out. Marcus laughed dryly. She's spinning it like she gave you some gentle, constructive feedback about being more humble, and you flew into a narcissistic rage and cut everyone off. Of course she is. Your dad is backing her up 100%. And Leo is telling all the cousins that you are secretly violently jealous of his deep emotional bond with your parents, and that's why you stopped coming around. It's incredibly twisted. Let them spin it however they want, I said, taking a sip of wine. The people who matter know the absolute truth. That's exactly what I told Helen, Marcus said. We are not buying a single word of their garbage. Helen actually cornered your mom at a family BBQ last week and told her off in front of everyone. She told your mom that what she did to your career was unforgivable, psychotic, and that you had every right to never speak to them again. Your mom completely lost her mind and locked herself in the bathroom crying. I bet she did. Just wanted you to know that you have fierce support here, Marcus said. About 4 months after I cut contact, I went to my mailbox and found a thick envelope. It was physical mail, not an email. It was from my mother, written in her incredibly distinctive, loopy cursive handwriting. I stood in my kitchen, debating whether to just shred it without opening it. But morbid curiosity won out. I sliced it open. The letter was 5 pages long, front and back. It was 5 pages of pure, unadulterated, narcissistic delusion. My mother spent the entire letter explaining in excruciating detail how deeply hurt she was by my behavior. She wrote about how she had only been trying to help me stay grounded and protect my soul from corporate arrogance. She wrote about how cutting off the family was cruel, abusive, and completely unnecessary. She wrote about how much they all missed me, how Leo was struggling deeply with my absence, and how the family dynamic was shattered because of my stubbornness. Nowhere in those 5 pages did she apologize for calling my vice president. Nowhere did she acknowledge the 3-page HR email filled with lies. Nowhere did she take a single ounce of responsibility for trying to ruin my life. Instead, the absolute kicker was the final paragraph. She suggested that if I apologized for my dramatic overreaction, and promised to be significantly more considerate of Leo's delicate feelings going forward, she would graciously forgive me, and we could move past this unfortunate misunderstanding and be a happy family again. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke. She wanted me to apologize to her. I took a photo of the letter, sent it to Uncle Marcus with the caption, "Are you seeing this level of delusion?" He called me laughing so hard he was wheezing. Is she completely off her medication? She wants you to apologize for her trying to get you fired? Apparently, I overreacted to her corporate sabotage, I said, and if I just admit I'm a monster and promise to hide my success better, she'll forgive me. Do absolutely nothing, Marcus ordered. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. She does not get to dictate the terms of reality. I threw the letter straight into the garbage disposal and turned it on. A year after cutting contact, I got a wedding invitation from a cousin on my dad's side. Uncle Marcus warned me that my parents and Leo would definitely be there. I RSVP'd yes and brought Claire as my +1. I wasn't going to let them run me out of my own extended family. The wedding was incredibly tense. My parents were sitting in the second pew of the church, with Leo slouched aggressively between them, looking miserable in an ill-fitting suit. My mom spotted me walking in with Claire. Her face went stark white, and she started whispering frantically to my dad. I just gave them a blank nod and found seats on the complete opposite side of the church. At the reception, I made my rounds, chatting with aunts, uncles, and cousins. Multiple people asked how my career was going. I kept my answers very brief, polite, and honest. Work was amazing, life was great. My mom was glaring daggers at me from across the ballroom all night. About 2 hours into the reception, I was waiting at the bar for drinks when my mom suddenly appeared right next to me, physically blocking my path back to the tables. "Can we talk right now?" she demanded, her breath smelling heavily of white wine. "There is absolutely nothing to talk about," I said calmly, not breaking eye contact with the bartender. "You cannot avoid me forever. I am your mother. I'm not avoiding you. I am simply not having a conversation about reconciliation until you actually admit what you did and apologize for trying to destroy my career. I sent you a 5-page letter pouring my heart out," she hissed. "That letter asked times me times to apologize to times you. That is not an apology. That is delusion." Her face flushed violently red. "You are being incredibly unreasonable. I made one tiny mistake out of love. Calling my VP was one mistake. Writing a 3-page manifesto of lies to my HR department was a second, massive, calculated mistake. That wasn't love. That was sabotage. I was trying to help you," she cried, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "You were becoming an arrogant monster. Someone needed to humble you before you ruined your life. And there it is," I said, grabbing my drinks. "You still truly believe you were right to try and get me fired. Until that fundamentally changes, you do not exist to me." I walked away, leaving her standing at the bar with her mouth hanging open. She didn't approach me for the rest of the night, but I saw her crying hysterically at her table while my dad awkwardly rubbed her back. Leo got completely drunk, tried to make a passive-aggressive toast about family loyalty that the DJ abruptly cut off, and they left the wedding early in disgrace. The atmosphere immediately improved once they were gone. Update 2. It has now been 2 full years since I cut contact with my parents and Leo. I am now 31 years old. 6 months ago, I achieved something I never thought possible this early in my career. I was promoted to Director of Analytics. My salary skyrocketed to $185,000 a year, plus massive equity in the company. I manage a department of 30 people. I sold my first house, took the massive equity I had built, and bought a stunning, modern home in Bellevue. I still drive the BMW, but I bought Claire an SUV when we officially got engaged last month. Life is genuinely, unbelievably good. But the absolute craziest twist to this entire saga came to light a few weeks ago, courtesy of Uncle Marcus. Marcus called me on a Sunday morning. "Are you sitting down?" "Always. What did they do now?" "I finally found out the real story behind that HR email your mom sent 2 years ago," Marcus said, his voice laced with disgust. "Leo got drunk at a cousin's birthday party last night and started bragging. Kid, your mom didn't write that email." I froze. "What do you mean? Your mom is terrible with computers, you know that. She didn't know how to look up your LinkedIn, and she definitely didn't know corporate HR jargon. Leo did it. Leo used his communications degree skills to draft that entire 3-page hit piece. He looked up your projects, he fabricated the harassment claims. He typed the whole thing up, and your mom just let him send it from her email account so it would look like a concerned parent instead of a jealous brother." My jaw unhinged. The sheer, malicious betrayal of it all washed over me. Leo had actively orchestrated the entire assassination attempt on my career because he couldn't stand that I was doing better than him. "Are you serious?" I whispered. "Dead serious. He was bragging about how he almost took you down a peg, and how smart he was for using HR buzzwords to trigger an investigation. Helen overheard him and practically dragged him out of the house by his ear." "Wow," I breathed. "Just, wow. But here is the absolute best part," Marcus said, his tone shifting to pure vindication. "Karma has completely caught up to them. You know how your parents were covering Leo's rent for that apartment? Yeah? Well, Leo tried to start a lifestyle clothing brand last year. He convinced your parents to take out a massive home equity line of credit HELOC on their house to fund his brilliant business venture. They gave him nearly $100,000. He completely blew it. Bought expensive inventory nobody wanted, blew money on lavish marketing parties for his friends, and the business went totally bankrupt in 8 months. You're kidding? Nope. And because interest rates spiked, your parents are drowning in the HELOC payments. They literally cannot afford their mortgage anymore. They had to put your childhood home on the market last week. They are downsizing to a tiny 2-bedroom condo. And Leo? Leo got evicted from his apartment because your parents couldn't pay his rent anymore. He had to move back in with them. He is currently 28 years old, completely unemployed, living in a cramped condo with his broke parents, with absolutely zero prospects. I sat back in my plush home office chair, looking out the window at my beautiful backyard in Bellevue. My parents had tried to stop me from succeeding. They had demanded I hide my accomplishments, And when I refused, they conspired with my deeply jealous brother to actively sabotage my career and ruin my life. And despite all of that, despite their absolute worst, most toxic efforts, I had succeeded anyway. I thrived. I built a beautiful life, found an amazing fiancé, and reached a level of financial security they could never dream of. Meanwhile, their blind, obsessive favoritism and enabling of their golden child had literally cost them their home, their retirement, and their eldest son. I didn't gloat. I didn't call them to rub it in. I simply thanked Uncle Marcus for the update, hung up the phone, and went back to planning my wedding with Claire, a wedding they will absolutely not be invited to.